One cursed finger, a school on edge. Gojo freezes spells midair, while something older whispers in Harry's bones. Hermione bets everything on soul anchors, and the clock is loud. Stick around, we're breaking the seal tonight. You're watching Cosmic Harry, and again, welcome. Today we will see, what if Harry Potter ate all the fingers of Sukuna? If you are new here, please subscribe and tap the bell. Now, let's begin.
The door spun until the world turned to corridors and echoes. Left. Harry said, bracing a hand to keep Ron from pitching into him as the rotating wall clicked back to stillness. Hermione. Shh, I'm here, she answered, breath quick but steady. 3 doors. We mark as we go. Ron pressed a chalk X at ankle height, because evil never checks the skirting board. Because Death Eaters look up for traps, not down for housekeeping. Hermione said, already scanning. Listen, do you hear water? Harry did, a distant tick of droplets muffled through stone. He didn't like how it folded into the silence. We stay together, he said. No heroic sprints, no split. Agreed, Hermione said, without her usual argument. That worried him more than if she'd fought him for a plan. They moved. Harry took point, Hermione a half, stepped behind to call details, Ron covering their backs with a wand pointed down the side corridor. The Department of Mysteries felt wrong tonight. Not the no sound carries, wrong he remembered, but a heavier quiet, as if the air itself were listening. The 4th room opened on a vault of shelves, relics in glass, tags in tiny, neat hands, a smell like coins after rain. Ron blew out a breath. Museum of Bad Ideas. Don't touch anything, Hermione said automatically. Then, gentler, catalog while we move. Just in case. Right, Ron said. Left eisel, skull with a clock for a tongue. Nope. Middle, box, black, looks like it hates us. Harry was already watching the box. It sat on a heavy shelf, iron-banded, stamped with cramped, unfamiliar script. No runes he knew, no Latin, no French. The bands weren't rusted, they were tired. The kind of metal that wanted to hold, but had been asked to hold too long. Harry. Hermione warned. We don't know if it's awake. I'm not touching it. He meant it. He didn't have to touch to want. The box felt like a headache pressed behind the eyes. Footsteps. Ron hissed. The word clipped off at the end. 2. Fast. Go, Harry said. Past the shelves, out the other door. They moved as one. A red jet cut past Ron's shoulder and cratered the wall. He snapped a shield that cracked but held. Hermione fired back with a silent stunner, precise, economical. Harry slid to the edge of the shelf, counted breath, beats, leaned, and sent a disarming charm that banged someone's hand against iron. 3 o'clock, Ron said. Another door, open. Block it, Harry said. Ron fired a quick series that caged the doorway in blue. It wouldn't hold forever. Let's go, Hermione started, and a curse skittered off the shelf above her head. The iron-banded box juddered, nudged by the blast. Don't, Harry said, and the word wasn't fast enough. The second curse hit the side of the shelving. The box jumped, hit the edge, and fell. It struck stone, split a band, and something like black glass cracked. 20 small shapes tumbled out and skittered across the floor like pale spiders. Mate, Ron breathed, horror curdling the syllable. Don't touch. I'm not, Harry said, hands open, backing a step. His scar hummed, a low, thick sound under the skin, and the air inside him flipped like a pressure change on a mountain. The fingers, mummified, brown pale, shriveled to hard knots, stopped moving on the floor. Then they didn't move so much as decide. He felt it before he saw it. The pull wasn't in his hands. It was a weight under the scar, a nausea roping down his throat, a tug at the back of his teeth, and a sink behind his eyes. Each finger blurred at the edges, a thread of dark static fraying out, and the threads lifted, flowed, and slid into him like smoke going home to a chimney. No gore, no contact, just a spiritual vacuum, his head an open window, the wind already inside. Harry. Hermione's voice had a crack in it he'd never heard. Harry, tell me what you're feeling. Pressure, he said around a swallow that didn't help. Like I'm falling. And I'm not touching them. I'm not. Keep your eyes on me, she said. Breathe. The last sliver drew in, his scar burned, and then cooled the way metal hisses when it hits water. A pattern, black, thin, almost ink-wash light, skated along his cheekbone and jaw, then down the side of his throat, then faded like frost. Two masked figures burst through the failing blue cage. The first raised a wand, the second went low for a tackle. Harry didn't think. He stepped into the low one, dropped a shoulder, and let the body go over with a short, ugly thud. Hermione's stunner took the standing Death Eater in the side of the neck. Ron's body, bind fixed the first one to the floor. We're leaving, Hermione said. No argument came. They ran. Madame Pomfrey had a mode Harry privately called Each-Edge Hurricane Hands Cool, voice brisk, movements that brooked no argument. She was in it from the second they burst through the hospital wing doors. Beds 2 and 3, she snapped. Mr. Weasley, if you bleed on my sheets, I will make you clean every inch by hand. Mr. Potter, sit. Miss Granger, speak. Hermione spoke, fast, factual, clipped. We were routed through the rotating doors to a relic vault. A cursed container fell and broke. 20 mummified digits, non-human. Unclear. They seemed to dissolve into Harry without contact. He's not bleeding. He says it felt like pressure and nausea. There were 2 Death Eaters. We defended and retreated. Symptoms. Pomfrey asked Harry, wand already flicking diagnostic tracers over his face and chest. Cold, he said. Then hot. Like a fever turning. Pain. Not. He winced, a hand going halfway to his scar, then stopping because he didn't want to touch his face and find it different. Not pain. Not like before. Before. Professor McGonagall's voice. Tight as the line of her mouth, but her hands were steady. She stood at the end of the bed, gaze moving like a metronome's scar eyes. Hand's breath, scar again. When it hurt with, you know. Voldemort. He didn't say the name. He didn't want to think the name and see what the marks on his skin did. Dumbledore stood behind McGonagall, and for once he was all silence. No twinkle, no gentle version of stern. He looked at Harry like the air in the room had changed, and he hadn't caught up yet. Headache. Pomfrey pressed. No, just crowded. He wasn't sure what that meant until something in the back of his thoughts smiled, and the smile felt like a knife turned point, down into wet wood. The black lines came back for a second, thin, crawling, like ink veins reaching for his ear and fading again, as if the skin itself rejected them. Markings, McGonagall said, and Harry watched her carefulness sharpen. They appear and recede. They're not curse lines, Pomfrey said. Not in the catalogs, I know. She tapped the air above his chest. A thread of light pulsed, then flattened. His running hot. Something is moving, but not blood something. Or Mestre Potter, Dumbledore said softly, and the sound of his voice made Harry realize he'd been waiting for it, like a hand to catch him before the ground went out. What did it feel like when the items entered you? Wrong, Harry said. Like whatever I am is a plug and someone pulled it. And now? Dumbledore asked. Harry opened his mouth to answer, and something under his skull leaned, curious, like a cat at the edge of a high shelf. You keep building graves inside yourself. It was not a voice. It was the idea of a voice, polished down and slid into his head like a shard. Harry flinched, everything in his body shouting move, and didn't, because there was nowhere to go that wasn't his own skull. What is it? Hermione was at his side before he'd finished recoiling. Harry, look at me. He looked. Her eyes were bright with worry and steady with purpose. He clung to the steadiness. Something spoke, he said, mouth dry. In my head. Ron's knuckles whitened on the rail. What did it say? Harry swallowed. That I build graves. No one moved. Even Pomfrey's hands paused in the air. McGonagall's mouth flattened further, which Harry wouldn't have thought possible. Headmaster, Snape said from the doorway, voice like a knife scraping a plate. If this is what it appears to be, then we are already too far behind it. Harry hadn't heard him come in. Of course he hadn't. Snape could unnerve a cat out of a window without touching it. Severus, Dumbledore said. Your insight. Snape's gaze flicked over Harry's face, caught on a fading line that ghosted his jaw, and returned to Dumbledore. There are layered defenses I can attempt to verify or repeal, but I will not stab at a cloud with a spoon. Legilimency will tell us if this is an external rider, a fracture, or, he didn't finish the thought, a fracture, Hermione repeated, tasting the word like medicine. Off what? Off a soul, Snape said, not looking at her. No, Dumbledore said immediately, but his eyes were still on Harry. Yes, Snape said evenly. If not our boys, then someone else's. Unless you have a new taxonomy you've been keeping for the end of term feast. Severus. McGonagall warned. Do it, Harry said, before the adults could argue. He didn't want to be a table people ate their opinions off. If something had moved in, he wanted a name for it, even if the name did nothing. If you can see it, see it. Snape's mouth tightened, as if the agreement disappointed him. He stepped closer, wand held loose. If you feel me press where I should not, push me out, he said. It is your head. It was a strange thing to hear from him. Harry nodded. Legilimens. The hospital wing receded like a curtain tearing along a seam. Snape usually arrived in his mind like cold water. This wasn't water. This was stone. Not dungeon stone, not Hogwarts stone. Something older and more deliberate. The mental room he found himself in was not a room. It was a hall built of bone, every column polished flat by hands that had never tired. Far off, through undulating heat, sat a shrine over black water, red banners, 4 eyes carved into the central slab. The air smelled like old iron. Harry did not know how he knew any of that. He just did. It was how his mind took it in. Snape knew it, too. Harry saw him, an impossible third-person angle inside his own head, freeze. Every teenage memory of Snape's anger suddenly, a small thing with its teeth, knocked out. A ripple spread across the surface of the black water. The shrine's eyes, carved, not living, opened. Snape tried to pull. Harry felt the tug against the back of his own eyes. The shrine looked at the tug and smiled without a mouth. The sound Snape made when it touched him wasn't a shout. It was a choke, like he'd swallowed heat. He came out of legilimency like a man hurled through glass. His chair went over. His hand hit the floor. His breath went hard and fast in a body that refused to panic for years at a time. "Severus!" McGonagall was there before he'd finished falling. She didn't touch him. He wouldn't want that. She knelt, spine straight, eyes on his face. Snape's pupils were huge. He blinked twice and forced them down to human. "Do not," he said hoarsely. "Go into that boy's mind." "We asked you too," Hermione said, voice shaking. "We needed to know." "You know," Snape said. He leveraged himself up on one elbow and looked at Harry. There was no hatred in it. There was something worse, recognition. There is a shrine in you, not to you. To something that likes altars. It has 4 eyes and a C. It looked at me as if I were flavor. The word tasted dirty out loud. Dumbledore's hand opened and closed at his side, a gesture Harry had never seen him allow himself. "I do not have a name for that," he said quietly. "I have never liked not having a name." "Good," Snape said. "Enjoy the ignorance while it still feels like an option." He pushed away McGonagall's offered hand and stood on his own. He did not sway. His voice, when he found it again, was functional. "Headmaster, I will not approach that mind again without a plan. Miss Granger, if you insist on understanding everything, understand this: the thing inside him is not only dark. It is structured." Hermione's chin lifted a fraction. "Then we map the structure." "Miss Granger," Snape said, and for once there was almost no bite in it, just the exhausted respect he gave students when they were useful despite themselves. "Pray the map isn't hungry." "Enough." Pomfrey snapped, not unkindly. "Out if you're not mending. In if you are." "Miss Bones," McGonagall called, and a girl Harry vaguely knew from Hufflepuff, Susan, red hair neat, sleeves rolled back, calm like someone who had learned how to be from grief, stepped into the next bed space carrying a tray. "Rotations say I'm on till 3, she said to Pomfrey, who nodded and pointed with her chin toward a cupboard. Susan set the tray down by Harry's bed. She didn't hover. She didn't stare at his scar as if it might sprout teeth. She poured water, set it where his hand could find it, and met his eyes when he looked at her. "Drink," she said. Not bossy, not timid. Just a thing that would help. He drank. The glass felt very ordinary. The ordinary steadied him more than any charm. "Thanks," he said. "You're not the only one something tried to turn into a problem this year," she said, matter of fact. "We don't run from problems in the ward. We catalog and treat. If catalog fails, we triage." He almost laughed. "Hermione says catalog while moving. Then you'll live," Susan said, and the corner of her mouth tipped up before she turned to Pomfrey's cabinet without fuss. Hermione had already dragged a chair bedside and opened a book on her knees. She wasn't reading for comfort. She was reading for a new language. "If what Snape saw is a shrine," she said, more to herself than anyone else, then it's a place. Places can take architecture. "You are not building anything inside my head," Harry said, but there wasn't heat in it. There was fear, and the fear was honest. "I'm talking about building outside and overlaying it," Hermione said. "Anchors, safe rooms. If the thing in you is negative, then we need positive anchors that are not." She searched for the word and surprised herself by choosing a small one. Not fancy. Ron, marginally less white around the edges now that he'd stopped trying to look unafraid, said, "Like the common room." "Yes," Hermione said. The common room. The library at 6 in the evening. Treacle tart. She looked at Harry until he looked back. Things you know with your hands and mouth and skin. not theory. We can build those in your head as places to stand. And what? Ron asked when she stopped. And I don't think we should kill him. Hermione said, too flat for drama. No one had said it out loud yet. The way the air went thin meant everyone had thought it. McGonagall's head turned. A quick snap of attention without surprise. Dumbledore's eyes flicked to Hermione's face with something like relief, as if he had been waiting for someone else to say it so he didn't have to choose where to stand alone. Explain, Snape said. Hermione swallowed. If what's inside him is negative energy, call it cursed energy if you like, I don't know the proper term, and if it's structured around that shrine, then killing the vessel might not destroy the structure. It could uncap it, like taking the lid off a boiling cauldron. The energy would vent into us, into the building, into. She made her hands stop moving. I can't be certain, but I am precise about being unsure. We need containment, not rupture. Dumbledore nodded once, the smallest concession of command. We proceed with humility. Snape didn't roll his eyes. That said more than an argument would have. Proceed, then. Proceed with what? Ron asked. We can't keep him in a box. No, Hermione said. Would teach him how to open a door inside his own head and lock it when he needs to. We find out if there's a language that can talk about this, and we do not do anything irreversible until we know what irreversible means for this system. System. McGonagall repeated softly, as if the new word fit the old world with surprising ease. Pomfrey clapped to break the unhelpful stillness gathering around the bed. Miss Granger, you and Mr. Weasley may sit for 1 hour. Then I will throw you out and make you sleep. Mr. Potter, if anything speaks inside your skull again, you tell me before you try to pretend you can carry it like an essay over Christmas. Harry nodded. Yes, ma'am. Good. Pomfrey said. She gave him a potion for the heat he still felt in his bones, and when she checked his pulse after he swallowed it, her fingers were cool and steady. He liked that she didn't pretend not to notice the slight tremor in his hand when he gave the glass back. She took it like she took everything else in her ward, as a fact to be worked with, not a sin to be forgiven. Sleep, when it came, had edges. Harry woke to the library at 6 in the evening in his head. Hermione must have wedged that in somehow, clever girl, and the knowledge that underneath the smell of parchment and dust and the pool of amber light on the table was a red sea and a shrine and something with 4 eyes that had looked at Snape and called him Flavor. He found Hermione in the restricted section 2 hours later, hair escaping its tie, 3 books open at once, ink smudged on the side of her hand where it dragged over her notes. Negative energy, she said before he could speak. Every culture with even a hint of this idea uses different language. If you drain the adjectives and the religious overlay, and you keep the mechanics, you get pressure zones. Places with higher negative load and lower. People who can feel and shape it, and sometimes structures inside minds, which is not exactly magical theory, but not completely new either. Occlumency describes rooms. This describes shrines, a soul architecture. Can we change it? Harry asked. He didn't like how his voice turned the question into hope. Maybe, Hermione said. Carefully. I want to start small. Breathing. Not meditation. She added quickly when his face did something at the word. Just counting. Naming what's in a room without judging it. Practicing stepping out of a feeling before it gets to tell you where your feet go. Building a common room you can find even when the corridor tries to move. Ron leaned against a shelf with a book closed over 2 fingers. He'd read some, then, even if he'd chosen something with a dragon on the front to trick himself into enjoying it. "And, in the meantime," he said, "we put you between me and anything with a mask." "Great," Harry said. "Plan as usual." Hermione looked at him for a long second, the way she did when she was choosing whether to tell him he was being brave or stupid. She picked a third option. "We stay together." "Right," Harry said. The words fell easier now with her saying them back. They went on like that until Pomfrey came and dragged them back to the beds, and somewhere in the night the markings on his face crawled and receded, and he didn't flinch as hard as the first time. He wrote down what he felt. Hermione made him be specific. Ron made him laugh when the words got too heavy. "Catalog while we move," Ron said, saluting with a biscuit he'd smuggled in from the kitchens. "Don't get crumbs in my ward," Pomfrey said from 6 beds away without looking up. "Sorry, madam," Ron muttered, and ate the whole thing at once to cover his guilt. Susan came and went, quiet as a clock that never lost time. Once, when the markings slid up and faded again, she didn't even glance. She just adjusted the blanket over his knees because the night had gone cold. "You're steady," Harry said without thinking. "So are you," she said. "You're here." He didn't know what to do with that, except tuck it away with the smell of the library and the taste of treacle tart for later use. "Albus," McGonagall said in the corridor outside, voice lowered. "What will the ministry do when they hear we have something in the school we cannot name?" "What the ministry always does," Dumbledore said. "Pretend it already had a policy for it. Then panic in the margins." "You joke," Snape said, "because you cannot afford not to." Dumbledore's smile, when it came, was very old and very tired. "I joke because we will need the laughter later. And if we are wrong," McGonagall asked. "If Miss Granger is wrong, then we are wrong together," Dumbledore said. "And we correct, but we do not break the boy to fix the theory." Snape's silence was not assent, but it was not the old, reflexive refusal. He had seen the shrine. He would move carefully now, if only because the alternative had teeth. Half a world away, a tall man on a glass rooftop put his phone face down on an air conditioning unit and stared at the night. Most people's energy signatures ran like sand poured under a door, soft, messy, diffused by distance. This spike was a nail through the map. He took off his blindfold and let the city sharpen until the stars heard their own echo and decided it wasn't for them. "That's not a blip," Satoru Gojo said to no one. Tone bored because boredom was kinder to the world than panic. His eyes, when he turned them toward the west, were not bored at all. That's an invite. He slipped the blindfold back into place like a formality and stepped off the roof. Infinity cushioned the fall and pushed the ground away like a polite, insistent hand. The air folded. Old wards, clever, stubborn, proud, rustled like cobwebs when you open a window after winter and the dust has to learn how to move again. He walked through them without changing his pace. Fog curled low over the Hogwarts grounds. The castle looked at him the way very old things do when something older arrives and smiles like it's been kept from its favorite game. Gojo put a hand in his pocket, tipped his head, and listened. The nail in the map sang. "Found the reactor," he said, and started toward the lights. Fog silvered the grass when the first curses flew. Stunners. Tonks barked. A fan of red light hissed across the lawn and stopped, every beam hanging midair like strings held in an invisible fist. Kingsley swore under his breath. What is that? Satoru Gojo stood 20 paces away, hands in his pockets, head tipped as if he were listening to the castle breathe. The blindfold cut a clean line across his face. He didn't look armed. He looked like the idea of untouchable. Put on 2 legs and decided to stroll. Dumbledore stepped forward, palms open. Stand down. By what authority? Gojo asked lightly. Headmaster. Kingsley warned, eyes on the frozen spells which quivered and failed. The color bled out of them. Red thinned to pink, then clear, then nothing. The magic didn't rebound or explode. It simply stopped existing in the space between them, as if the air itself refused to be hit. Dumbledore's eyes sharpened. By my duty to protect my students. Good duty. Gojo nodded once, almost respectful. Bad opening move. Tunks, wand low now, squinted. What did you do? Physics, Gojo said. Magic? Muttered Moody from the steps. He'd come silently, a habit that outlived the worst years. Different flavor, same problem. Different framework. Gojo corrected, still pleasant. Your spells travel. Mine make travel optional. Dumbledore didn't smile. Then let us speak before anyone else learns to fire first. Gladly. Gojo flicked 2 fingers. The last suspended spark winked out. I came because something in your school invited the end of a city. Not by intention, Dumbledore said. Intention is rarely the loudest alarm, Gojo said. Where is the boy? Hospital wing, McGonagall answered, voice tight from the doorway. And mind your tone. My tone is cushioning, Gojo said mildly. I can remove it. Enough, Dumbledore said. He met Gojo's blindfold like it were eyes. You'll respect this ground. I like this ground, Gojo said, and for the first time his voice had a hint of sincerity. It remembers how to stand. Lead the way. They crossed the lawn together, headmaster, which with a spine like a spear, an auror pair, a tired veteran, and the most relaxed problem in the world. No one spoke. The castle's wards rustled again as Gojo passed, offended and curious. Harry was awake. He looked like someone who'd slept in small, careful pieces. Hermione perched at his bedside with a stack of notes. Ron sprawled in a visitor's chair, pretending not to doze. Madame Pomfrey had set the ward like a battlefield. Clear lines, supplies ready, nothing wasted. Gojo stopped at the foot of Harry's bed and took off the blindfold. Hermione went still. The eyes were ice, bright and very human. Too human, even they saw as if seeing were a skill he drilled 8 hours a day. Hi, reactor, Gojo said. Harry's jaw set. Don't call me that. Fair, Gojo said, unbothered. What's your name? Harry, Harry, Gojo repeated, tasting the syllables like a new language. He shifted his focus. Harry felt it, like a soft pressure against the skin without contact. The room narrowed, just the bed, just the boy, just the line under the scar where heat pooled. Hermione's voice found itself. What are you doing? Reading, Gojo said. Your systems leak and sing in different parts of the spectrum. Mine hear the off-key. His gaze flitted over Harry's face, chest, hands. Rot in the scar. Old, clever, parasitic. But not the loudest song. The new sound is worse. Name it. Dumbledore said gently, because names mattered. Gojo's eyes slid to him, then back to Harry. You're not possessed, he said, precise as a scalpel. You're a vessel. Hermione's pen hovered. Difference. A possession sits on you, Gojo said. A vessel is you fused. Integrated energy system sharing a body with a stronger pattern. Think of two currents braided together, one neutral. He tapped the air above Harry's heart. One negative, structured. He looked at Dumbledore. If you kill him, that structure might dump everything it's holding into your pretty valley. Catastrophic release. Hermione exhaled, a quick, small sound. I said as much, she murmured. I wasn't sure. You were right to be unsure, Gojo said, with a grudging respect he didn't often spend. I am less unsure. Dumbledore folded his hands. And your protocol? Execute the vessel if thresholds are crossed, Gojo said calmly, before the pattern stabilizes into something you can't uproot without digging a grave for a continent. I follow the line. If the boy surrenders the wheel, I end the car. Ron's chair scraped. You'll what? Gojo didn't look at him. It's not personal. It is. Hermione snapped. He's a person. Yes, Gojo said, which is why I'm talking to him now. He tilted his head, softening not his words but the edges of them. Harry, how much of it can you feel? A knock, a pressure. Full words. One line. Harry said. Cruel. Correct. Gojo's mouth twitched like he'd swallowed a laugh at a funeral. Yeah, that one does correct. Very well. He raised a hand before Ron could bristle again. Listen, my job isn't to scare you. It's to tell the truth fast enough that we don't trip on a pretty lie. He looked to Dumbledore, then Hermione. Talk it out. 10 minutes. Then I teach. Dumbledore inclined his head. Very well. The ethics triangle set itself fast. Protocol exists for a reason, Gojo said. Most vessels fail. You kill them before the thing inside decides your city is a new hobby. And your protocol, Dumbledore said evenly, does not account for the fact that our student is not a template. He is Harry. He is not a statistic. It also doesn't account for your magic's quirks. Hermione added quick. Our soul, work is messy but real. We have rooms inside minds, anchors. If negative energy moves like pressure, we can design counter pressure that isn't a weapon. Killing could uncork all of this like a cauldron. Containment, Dumbledore said, before rupture. Containment and a line. Gojo returned. We define what surrender looks like. If he crosses it, I act. Define. Hermione challenged. He gives it the wheel on purpose. Gojo said, simple. Not a slip. A choice. If he chooses to let it drive, he's gone. Harry hadn't said anything for a while. He pushed himself a little higher on the pillows. If I choose to let it, him drive, I want you to stop it. Hermione whipped to face him. Harry. I'm not planning to, he said. I'm saying it out loud, so you don't have to guess later. The room stilled. Dumbledore's eyes closed, the kind of blink that hid an old man's grief for a heartbeat, then opened again. We accept a provisional line, he said. But we begin with protection, not execution. Fine, Gojo said. Then we start now. He held out a hand. Harry, wary, placed his wand in it. Gojo weighed it like a paperweight, hummed at the core's resonance, and broke it cleanly across his knee. The sound was small and obscene. Harry's fist closed. That was a phoenix feather. And it made you lazy, Gojo said, dropping the halves onto the bedside table as Pomfrey hissed like a kettle at sacrilege. Wands are elegant crutches. You think through wood. I need you to think without props. You can get another later. For now, we teach your body to feel flow. Feel what? Ron demanded. Cursed energy, Gojo said. CE, negative charge. Your body's already producing it now, whether you want it to or not. He tapped his own sternum. Basic rule, don't leak. Second rule, direct what you keep. Third rule, put intent on it so it does the shape you want and not the shape your fear wants. Translate, Hermione said, already flicking to a fresh page. Flow is a river, Gojo said. Intent is the gate you open for the river. Technique is the channel you've dug, so the river goes where it should and not into your neighbor's kitchen. Hermione wrote, then underlined, don't leak, direct, intend, shape. Show me your hands, Gojo said. Harry held them out. They shook very slightly. Good, Gojo said, not unkindly. That means your nervous system hasn't lied to you yet. He took Harry's right wrist between finger and thumb. Not touching skin, infinity sat between, the smallest cushion of never. Close your eyes. Breathe out like you're trying to fog a mirror. Count 4. Pause 2. In 4. Pause 1. Again, Harry did it. The first breath felt stupid. The second hurt. By the third, something under his ribs stopped flinching at the fact of being watched. Now, Gojo said quietly, think of a wheel in your gut. Turn it slow. Don't force it. Don't help it. Just turn. I don't see anything, Harry muttered. You're not supposed to see it, Gojo said. That's vanity. You're supposed to feel when the leak stops. He waited. There. Harry almost said, what? Then realized something had clicked, the way a door decides to be open after sticking all winter. The buzzing under his skin didn't go away. It threaded. His fingers steadied. Good, Gojo said. Now send a thread to your palm. Not all of it. A thread. Harry focused. The thread went everywhere except his palm. Anger flared at his own clumsiness. Don't muscle it, Gojo said, as if reading the thought. Muscle is wand, thinking. Intention is phrase, thinking. Make the idea small. Harry breathed, scaled the thought down until it was a simple instruction, and a small warmth drew itself into his palm. Hermione leaned forward. Can you hold it while you talk? Maybe, Harry said. Why? Because I want to paint anchors on top of that. Hermione said matter of factly. While you hold the thread, think common room. Not the idea, the room. The warmth. The feel of the arm of the sofa under your wrist. Dean's old Chudley Cannon's poster curling at the edge. Ron snoring and pretending he doesn't. I don't snore, Ron said. You do. Hermione and Harry said together. Harry pictured it, not like a picture, but like the knowing in his hands. The warmth in his palm steadied, as if liking the memory because it fit. Good, Hermione said softly. Library next. Not the smell of books because that's too poetic and I don't trust poetry right now. The weight of a book on your left palm, the sharpness of a quill when it catches. The way Madame Pince clears her throat exactly once before she glares. Harry's mouth tugged. That's accurate. Quidditch, Ron put in unexpectedly. Not flying high. The 5 seconds before kickoff when your stomach's wrong and right at the same time. Harry let that sit in his chest wrong, right edge steady. The thread held. That, Gojo said. That's a safe room. You build 3 of those, you can walk to them when the shrine starts singing in your head. It sang to Snape, Ron said, a little savage. It tasted him, Harry said, flat. He said flavor. Then we won't feed it, Hermione said. We'll feed you. Gojo slid the blindfold back up. Just for a second. The world sharpened again. He nodded once. For someone who thinks with wood too much, you're doing fine. Harry shot him a look. Was that a compliment? It was a floor, Gojo said. We're not on the roof yet. Can you always stop spells? Tonks asked from the doorway. She wasn't challenging him, she just needed to calibrate. I can always make touch very hard, Gojo said. Infinity means anything reaching me has to cross a distance that keeps subdividing. Your spell wasn't wrong. It just didn't ever finish getting to me. Kingsley's mouth quirked. You're a never arrives. Exactly, Gojo said, oddly pleased. And the boy here? If we get him to stop leaking and stop lending his fear to the engine, we can keep him from becoming a never leaves. Dumbledore watched the small warmth glow steady in Harry's palm and finally let out a breath. We will take that work. We will take the line. Gojo reminded. We will define it carefully. Hermione countered. Short lines, Gojo said. No speeches. He crosses, he chooses. I act. Say it. Hermione told Harry, eyes sharp with care. Harry didn't look away. If I choose to give it the wheel, stop me. If I slip, drag me back. Ron swallowed. Would drag you back. Susan Bones came in then with a tray of tea, the clink of cups a sensible sound in a room that had forgotten sensible existed. She set the tray down, poured without spilling, and offered a cup to Harry. Hands steady. She noted softly when he took it. The black markings along his cheek flickered once and smoothed away. She didn't flinch. Keep them that way. I'm learning, he said. Good, she said, meeting his eyes. We need that. 2 lines. Trust laid like a plank between them. Pomfrey shooed half the onlookers out. Training became breathing and small tasks thread to palm, thread to heel, thread to rib cage. Hermione in layering anchors, Ron goading gently whenever Harry's concentration frayed. Gojo corrected posture and intention the way a patient swordsman moves a student's wrist, minimal, exact. Leak, Gojo would say, and Harry would fix the leak. Too much, Gojo would say, and Harry would unclench until the river ran rather than hammered. Again, Gojo would say. Between drills, the talk returned to edges and ethics in smaller bites. Protocol exists because most people aren't you. Gojo told Hermione. They don't have an anchor vocabulary at 16. Then we extend ours, Hermione said. Language is buildable. Dumbledore listened more than he spoke, hands quiet, gaze steady. When he did speak, it was to pin a decision to the table. No one enters Harry's mind without his consent. If the ministry calls, I will answer before they arrive. We will not discuss execution in the corridors. And if he fails, Snape asked, compelled by the job that had taught him to live in contingencies. Then we will know the failure by the terms we set, Dumbledore said. And we will not let that knowledge turn us cruel before we must be hard. Semantics, Snape said, but the bite was dulled. Evening slipped toward night again. The ward's windows went dark with wings. Owls, dozens, maybe 100. The glass blurred with the shadow of all those bodies and all those eyes and all those messages written by hands shaking with fear or anger, or the kind of certainty that breaks things. Kingsley went to the sill. Ministry, he said. Multiple seals. Press. Office. Unspeakables. Dumbledore reached for his cloak. I'll take the first answers. Bring me whoever thinks they have protocol, Gojo said, tying his blindfold like a soldier laces boots. We'll compare notes. Hermione capped her ink. Harry, anchors before sleep, she said. Common room. Library. 5 seconds before kickoff. Treacle tart. Ron added, because sometimes the world needs one sweet thing set on the table with the tea. Harry closed his eyes and found each room by feel. The warmth in his palm answered. The leak held. Somewhere deep under all that steady, something old and structured watched and waited and did not get the wheel. He opened his eyes to the dark window. Fine, he murmured to the night and to the letters beating at the glass. Then we learn. The sound reached first glass breaking in layers, then the long breath a crowd takes when fear walks in. Harry, Hermione, and Ron were halfway down the high street when Honeyduke's front windows blew outward. Sugar dust hung in the air like fog. A child screamed. 3 black shapes moved through the new hole in the wall, wands up, shoulders sure. Left? Hermione called, dragging a pair of second years toward the alcove by Scriven shafts. Mind the door. Keep it shut! I've got the lane, Ron said, sprinting to the narrow run beside Zonko's, wand up, jaw set. Harry stepped into the middle of the street because there was no time to do anything else. Shups first, he shouted to the dozen DA kids who'd come down for butterbeer and found a war waiting. Get civilians out, pairs, no heroics. Curses stitched the air. Shields snapped up. A red bolt skidded across cobbles and snapped a cart wheel. Apples rolled like marbles. Nevilla's voice from the right, Hannah, down. A flash of green cut low and mean through the sugar fog. Guinea, Hermione yelled. Harry saw her, a streak of red hair as she hauled a first, year behind a stone planter. A Death Eater angling to flank her with the kind of confidence people use when they've never been hit hard enough. On me. Harry told himself, because that's how the training worked. Not poetry, not panic, just a job. He ran. Ron's stunner clipped the flanker. The man went to one knee, snarled, and sent a bone, cracker curse that shattered the lip of the planter. Ginny flinched, head turning, and the second Death Eater raised his wand with a line he meant to be final. Harry didn't have a wand. He had the wheel in his gut and a choice. Thread to palm. Don't leak. Intent first. He stepped between the curse and the girl and threw his hand up. The thread in his palm thickened on command, then went rope, taut. The curse hit, hot, blunt, and slid sideways off his open hand like rain off a window. It tore a furrow in the street and went out with a hiss. Harry! Ginny half sobbed, equal parts relief and anger. You idiot! Move! He barked, not looking back. Back door! Hermione's voice, 2 streets away now and everywhere, organizing, triaging, directing. Pairs! Don't bunch. 2 more masks spilled from the 3 broomsticks, one firing wide to scatter, the other precise. The precise one saw Harry, recalculated, and lifted his wand to the center line of Harry's chest with a green that turned the world quiet around it. Time didn't slow. It narrowed. The anchor, common room, library at 6. 5 seconds before kickoff held. The wheel turned. Harry stepped forward, not back. Avada Ked. The jet of green shot clean. It should have been a line. It felt like a decision. Halfway between wand and target, it met something that wasn't a shield. Harry's hand moved in a small, exact arc, like he was cutting a ribbon with 2 fingers. The jet split down the middle. The halves peeled away from each other, hissing, and fizzled to empty air, as if the space between pieces had decided it didn't feel like death today. Neville swore softly from behind a toppled barrel. The precise Death Eater's breath caught. Even the panicking crowd stuttered into a brief, stunned hush. Mind your door. Hermione barked from the alley, filling the silence with instruction so no one started worshipping or screaming. McLagan. Eyes on the roofline! A third mask snatched a boy by the collar and pressed a wand to his temple. Drop. Harry didn't wait. He crossed the distance in 3 steps and hit the Death Eater's layered protego with his open palm. The curse thread in his hand tightened and became a blunt, fast thing. Shield met force. The shield buckled, the way glass does when it's strong until it isn't, and the man went backward into a wall. The boy sprawled free and scrambled away on hands and knees. Fall back to the square. Kingsley's voice rolled down the street, deep and controlled. He must have come in from the far end with two aurors, their shields overlapped in simple, clean geometry as they herded civilians toward the fountain. Keep moving. Harry's focus narrowed and widened in pulses. Every time he steadied the thread, the world came into the crisp, useful detail Gojo had drilled: angle, distance, force. Every time the thread thinned, panic pressed in from the edges, screams, shouts, the stink of singed wood. Left. Hermione again. He pivoted. A Death Eater on the roof of tomes and scrolls had found height and thought it meant authority. Harry didn't throw anything. He looked at the man's wand hand and intended a pull. The man yelped and flailed as his own balance betrayed him. He didn't fall. Harry didn't want him dead. He wanted him out. "Down the side!" Ron yelled. "They're pushing." A fresh blast rolled from Honeydukes. The front awning went up with a whoop and guttered against a quick, hissing rain. Someone had conjured it. Good, good, Jenny. Harry called, scanning for the red hair. "Behind you. Thanks to your stupid head," she snapped, but there was a smile in it, which meant she was alive. "Keep moving," he said, and then he heard it, the thin, terrified cry of a child who hadn't learned how to be brave yet because no one should have to at 6. He turned his head. That single beat, the human one, the one you take because you can't not, was the opening. The precise Death Eater had found a second breath. Crucio. He hissed, low and close. The curse tagged Harry's shoulder in a grazing line. Pain lanced in, a hot, clinical bite, and his brain did the thing it always did. It reached for anger, because anger was simpler than hurt. He overreached. The common room flickered. The library at 6 wavered. The 5 seconds before kickoff tore like thin paper. Something older slid its hands inside his and curled them into fists. Heat ran up his jaw in black ink. Markings rose. Breath went thin. The corner of his mouth tilted, and the expression felt like it belonged to someone who used mercy as a spice. The precise Death Eater, not an idiot, took a step back. "You call that pain?" Sukuna asked through Harry's mouth, amused and accurate. The world narrowed further, not to a line, but to a point, a red banner over black water, a shrine with eyes. The street existed the way an afterthought exists. Another Avada cracked. Harry, Sukuna, turned his head like he was watching a fly and let the green thread cut close to his cheek. A thin line appeared in the air, a seam, and the killing curse split again and died the way it had before. He smiled at the Death Eater's fear. "Parlor tricks." "Harry!" Hermione's voice knifed in from the alley. He didn't look. The shrine didn't need to look. Human voices were weather. Weather was for other people. "On your right." Ron shouted, too loud, too near, too Ron. Sukuna ignored him. He stepped into another shield and hit it with an open palm. The brick wall behind it sputtered. The man inside the bubble gasped like a fish in a bucket. Another tried to flank. Sukuna didn't move his body. He intended a line of pressure at the second man's knee. The joint went soft. The floor met the man's face. "Stop," Ginny said from somewhere behind him, and her voice didn't aim for logic. It aimed for Harry. "Look at me." He didn't. The shrine didn't care about red hair and a mouth that always said what it meant. The shrine cared about clean, efficient harm and the neat way a body gives up when it learns it's not the sharpest thing in the room. Then, in a jagged edge of vision, a small boy turned his head and saw the markings on Harry's face. The boy froze, not because of the Death Eater at his back, but because Harry looked like something his mother told him not to think about after dark. Fear hit harder than the Crucio. It hit like a hand around the part of Harry that wasn't for shrines, the part with treacle tart and library dust and Ron's snore and the feel of the sofa arm under his wrist. The thread in his palm slipped. No, not a surrender. A pull. He dug for the wheel, the way you grope for a light switch in a strange room and find it, because you know what a switch feels like even if you don't know the wall. The markings stuttered. The smile faltered. Harry, Hermione said again, closer now, voice steady, breath hard. Library at 6. He pictured the light on polished wood and the way Madame Pince clears her throat exactly once. The thread tightened like a good knot. The shrine receded a hair. His body went heavy and ordinary in a tired, wonderful way. Common room, Ron said, voice raw. Sofa arm under the wrist. The stupid cannon's poster curling at the edge. A chessboard with a pawn missing because someone lost it in second year and never replaced it. The thread held. 5 seconds before kickoff. Wrong right, edge steady. Breath in 4, hold 2. Out 4, hold 1. The markings on his face faded like ink rinsed off skin. He staggered 2 steps and caught himself on the broken planter. Ginny slipped under his arm and braced him with her shoulder. All right? No, he said honestly, because lying made the wheel slip. But here. Good, she said, and shoved him away from the next curse. Keep being here. Kingsley and 3 Aurors finished the rest, moving like they'd rehearsed this exact mess 3 dozen times and didn't mind doing it again. The last mask disapparated with a crack that sounded like frustration sworn through teeth. The street sagged with the kind of silence that comes after too much noise. Hermione was there a second later, hands on Harry's face, searching his eyes for something beyond pupils. Say something boring. Treacle tart is better than pumpkin pasties, he said, and she let out a breath she'd been holding for a minute and a half. True, Ron said, coughing out a laugh he hadn't found room for until now. Help them, Harry said, nodding toward the civilians. His legs had decided to be furniture. He liked that. Furniture didn't make choices it couldn't keep. Go. On it, Hermione said, and peeled away into work. She didn't say, don't do that again. She didn't waste breath on blame. She gave orders, took stock, set people moving in useful directions. Susan Bones moved through the chaos like she was used to it. She didn't run. She didn't stare. She pressed cloths to cuts, levered one man off a twisted ankle, and handed a shaking shopkeeper a cup of water with a steady sip. Then breathe. When she reached Harry, she didn't ask if he was all right. She looked at his hands, saw them steady, and nodded once. Hold this, she said, and put the cup in his palm. His fingers closed around it like he'd trained for this exact task. Good. Her fingers brushed his for a second as she let go, quick, ordinary contact that meant you. In the room, he felt the ridiculous urge to thank her like she'd hauled him out of a lake. Thanks, he said anyway. We'll catalog and treat, she said, same as in the ward, and moved on. Overhead, an owl's shadow crossed the smoke, a banner unfurled from a roofline. Someone with a camera, someone with a deadline. A headline later would do what headlines do when they don't understand the framework, scream and guess. For now, the street breathed. Bellatrix watched from the corner of the shrieking shack's old fence line, body still, lips parted, eyes wide and bright as knives. The first time she'd seen the Dark Lord remake a room. She'd laughed until she cried with the rightness of it. This was not that. This was something older than thrill. This was recognition dressed up as hunger. She had come because the ministry had whispered Hogsmeade, and the Dark Lord had smiled in that thin way he did when he was sure the punchline would be someone else's throat. She would have come anyway. She liked markets for the noise, the way fear traveled from stall to stall faster than fire if you gave it a good wind. But the boy, her boy, she decided in the same breath, she decided to breathe again, remade the terms of things. No wand, no hissing, no petty theater. The killing curse split around his hand like he was narrowing a door and telling death it didn't fit the frame. Shields collapsed like bad marriages under the weight of a blunt truth. He smiled once, just once. It wasn't a boy's smile. Bellatrix's knees went loose. Her hands trembled and then steadied on the fence post, because she was not a girl anymore, and she knew how to ride the wave of a feeling and not drown. "My shrine," she whispered, the words an old prayer she'd just remembered and found blasphemous and perfect. "My king." She pressed her teeth into the meat of her thumb until she tasted iron, because sometimes the body needs reminding that blood is in it. The taste anchored her enough to think, do not kill. Capture, not for the Dark Lord, for herself, for the world, for the day when the old, brittle lordling learned what devotion meant when a god of cruelty smiled without caring whether anyone sang. She tracked every angle. The friends, the old man, the blindfolded one who moved like he'd already decided how the ground would treat him. She watched the DA pairings, the aura geometry, the way the boy staggered after the markings faded. She learned his tells in 11 minutes and 14 seconds of street war and knew she'd need more. Soon, she told no one. Soon, my shrine. I'll bring you a gift you'll like. I'll bring you me. She turned on her heel and stepped into a shadow that had been set aside for her by habit and sin. They debriefed in the back room of the Hogshead because Aberforth didn't ask questions unless not asking would break the ceiling beams. Hermione set out 3 lists with a piece of charcoal and a tea saucer for a straightage. "Triggers," she said, writing the word at the top of the first. "Anchors." Top of the second. "Lines." Top of the third. Gojo leaned against a barrel, arms folded, blindfold in his pocket, hair a mess from moving too fast. He watched Harry like a surgeon watches a patient who has decided to live but hasn't signed the paperwork yet. "Trigger," Hermione said. "Protective overreach. You saw Ginny in danger, and you spent more than you should have to get between. Also pain," Ron said. "That Crucio nicked you." Harry rubbed his shoulder, remembering the cut, glass line. Right. Pain plus protective overreach. Also public. Hermione added, quick. Noise and fear went up. "That pressure pushes your leak." Harry nodded.
"Yes, anchors,"
Hermione said, moving to the second list. Library at 6 worked. Common room worked. 5 seconds before kickoff worked. Add. Simple task. Susan said from the doorway, appearing with a tray because somehow she always had a tray. Holding a cup. It steadied your hands. Hermione wrote it down. Good. We'll drill that one. Line. Gojo said, tapping the third list with a fingertip. Say it again. Harry met his eyes. If I choose to give him control, you stop me. Gojo's gaze didn't blink. And today, I slipped, Harry said. I didn't choose. I pulled back. Correct, Gojo said. You don't die for slips. He turned to Hermione. You teach him to make the pull a habit. I will, she said, and the words landed like a contract. The other line, Kingsley put in, settling his bulk on a stool that looked like it didn't appreciate the honor. Public perception. The prophet already has quills up their noses. If 1,000 people say Potter used unknown dark, the ministry will need a shape to pour fear into. The shape will be me? Dumbledore said wryly from the corner, where he sat with a cup and a kind of deliberate calm that told Harry the old man was measuring more variables than he would say aloud. It usually is. Let them pour, Gojo said, shrugging. While they write, we train. While they leak, we stop leaking. Aberforth slid a plate of bread onto the table between them and grunted. Eat while you plan. Planning's worse on an empty gut. The bread was simple and good. Harry ate a piece because the body needed uncomplicated victories after complication tried to sit on it. Susan set a cup by his elbow. Their fingers didn't touch this time. The steadiness stayed anyway. Next drills, Hermione said. Back to work. We'll practice anchor, switching under noise. Ron, I need you to heckle. I was born to heckle, Ron said, putting a hand to his heart. Ginny, Hermione went on. You'll be the moving variable. Pop in and out of his sight line so we can build a reflex that doesn't cost him the wheel. I can do that, Ginny said, tying her hair back tighter. And I'll shout mean things if he needs them. Thanks, Harry said dryly. Anytime. Gojo, Hermione said, can we layer your infinity over a training lane so he learns to make decisions while nothing touches him and while everything tries to? Yes, Gojo said. And I'll walk him through striking without feeding the leak. Barehand CE is fun until you realize you're building a pipeline to your worst thought. Translation. Ron muttered. Don't punch with your fear. Exactly, Gojo said, pleased. Punch with your decision. Dumbledore's eyes went to the window. The ministry owls will multiply until we answer. I will answer tonight. Kingsley nodded. I'll go with you. Someone with a badge will help, even if it only helps the badge. Harry leaned back against the rough wall and let the small noise of people doing their best soak in. He'd scared a child. He hated that. He'd stopped. He liked that more. He would need to like it louder. Hermione nudged his foot with hers under the table. Say something boring, she murmured. Treacle tart is better than pumpkin pasties, he said again, and she smiled because ritual had weight. Keep to that, Gojo said. Next time the green line comes, you split it and you don't smile. Was I smiling? Harry asked, uneasy. A little, Ginny said. Don't do that. I won't, Harry said, meaning it enough that the wheel turned on its own for a second, happy to have a job. A low thump sounded in the lane outside, just a door. Harry didn't jump. That felt like the best win of the hour. Hermione lifted the third list. Line no choosing surrender. Drill anchors under noise. Plan. Teach the body boredom so the mind can work when the street won't let it. Parlor tricks, Ron said, glancing at Harry. Not ours. Harry said, steady? Not anymore. Bellatrix, somewhere in the dark of the village, smiled without humor and made herself a promise with teeth in it. The prophet's first broadside landed with the Don Otitar Wamu Ields UNK on O double and dark, Ministia Con CRND, People read it over tea and let fear pick their breakfast. At Hogwarts, Harry held a cup in a steady hand and recited the shape of the common room in his head in case the day tried to turn wrong. Again, Gojo said, patient as a metronome. Again, Hermione echoed. Harry breathed, counted, and turned the wheel. The shrine in the Red Sea looked up and waited. He stayed in the library at 6, and the door stayed shut. The corridor's lamps made a long zipper of light toward the hospital wing. Gojo walked it like he owned the floor. The air flexed. He didn't stop. "Clever," he said, to no one, and the three unspeakables sliding out of a fold in time like knives coming out of paper. Croaker led, older than his posture admitted, jaw set, wand low in the hand of a man who'd picked it up for work, not worship. "Contain the reactor," Croaker said, voice calm. "Team 2, the boy. Team 1, the blindfold. Don't shoot," the woman on Croaker's left murmured. "In his field it's a waste." "On my mark?" Croaker said. They moved like they'd trained this with furniture and a willing friend. 2 glyphs snapped under Gojo's feet. Time, cages, stacked loops, elegant spellwork. The kind of thing that makes men proud and ruins them. For half a second, his heel did not quite finish meeting the flagstone. "Mark," Croaker said. Across the hall, a second knot of unspeakables folded sound itself and walked the ripple into the hospital wing. Harry stood from the bed because his body still thought. Standing meant control. A black bag zipped over his head without touching his face. His hands hit invisible bonds that tightened, then softened, smart restraints that adjusted to skin temperature. Someone said, almost kindly, "Easy, son." Another, "Carry." 1, 2, Ron lunged and hit a wall he couldn't see. "Get off him. Let him breathe," Hermione snapped, already reaching for her wand, eyes jumping ahead to an outcome she didn't like. Gojo. Harry got out, and then the hallway dropped 8 inches and refused to give them back. "Time prison?" Croaker said, satisfied. "Move." Gojo looked down at the glyphs. They were pretty. Pretty wasn't the same as right. "Magic prison," he said, almost affectionate. "Wrong manual." He stepped. Infinity unhooked the loops like a patient hand, taking down holiday decorations. 1 thread at a time. The floor remembered it was floor. He finished his stride. Croaker's pupils flicked wide. Adjust. Gojo was in front of him without being in between. He took the wand from Croaker without touching his fingers. He set it on the floor like a teacher removing a pointer from a child's hand. "Don't," Gojo said gently. The woman on the left tried to fold sound again. Infinity let the fold try. It did not let the fold arrive. The ripple became a thought the air had once and then forgot. Different framework. Gojo said, almost apologetic now, "I did warn your lawn." The team in the ward reached the threshold with Harry half carried. Gojo tipped his head. "No," he said. Every bond on Harry's body unknotted at once. It wasn't a reversal. It was absence, like the bindings had been remembered wrong. Harry ripped the bag off. His face was pale and furious. "They were taking me to the death chamber," Croaker said. He didn't lie. To freeze the problem. "By what authority?" McGonagall demanded from the doorway, tart as a slapped kettle. "Oars," Croaker said, "because men like him made authority with their mouths when they needed to." "We don't break children. We break catastrophes. If the vessel ruptures, Gojo said, and smiled in a way that was not kind, "is my job." The unspeakables stood down because they were professionals and because the man in front of them made physics into a door he alone owned the key to. Headmaster, Croaker said, turning to Dumbledore, who had watched without blinking. We will require a plan on parchment by morning. You will have one, Dumbledore said, voice perfectly even, and you will not touch my student again without it. Croaker nodded once, short and honest, and signaled the retreat. The air uncreased after them. Gojo watched them go. I dislike kidnapping, he said mildly. It makes bad stories in the middle of good ones. Harry let out the breath he'd been holding since the bag. Thanks. You're welcome, Gojo said. Now we set terms so I don't have to save you from your allies twice. They crammed into Dumbledore's office like a jury that had no interest in deliberation. The late sun made the glass shine a bruised blue. Fawkes watched from his perch with the old, inexplicable patience of things that remember how empires taste when they're done. Terms, Gojo said, without preamble, as if reading a contract at a kitchen table. We write a binding vow. My system, your parchment. Witnessed, signaled, enforced. Dumbledore's quill hovered. Say them. Gojo ticked them off with a finger he didn't quite lift. 1. I train the vessel fully. No withheld techniques. No half measures. If you already have a word for stop leaking, teach it to me so I can teach it to him. 2. Dumbledore prompted. 2. He takes responsibility for his enemy. Gojo said, eyes on Harry. You finish Voldemort. You finish the fragments that tie him to you. All of them. Harry didn't flinch. Yes. And 3. Gojo said, slower, not theatrical, simply careful with the weight of it. If the vessel willingly yields control to the other pattern, if he gives it the wheel by choice, the vow authorizes and compels me to kill him cleanly and immediately. The word kill cut each face in its own way. Ron went white, then red. McGonagall's mouth tightened to a blade. Snape didn't move at all. Hermione's hand trembled once as she set a sheet of parchment down. She made it stop. We define willingly, she said. He slips, he fights, he regains. That is not willingly. He chooses, that is. Gojo nodded. Short lines. No loopholes. Dumbledore wrote. The words floated a hair above the parchment as if they were waiting for the world to accept them. Harry read them, with his mouth moving once on kill. He lifted his head. I agree. Add my part, Hermione said, voice thinner than before, but steady where it counted. Witness a Hermione Jean Granger, of age for magical contracts. I attest to willingly, as defined. Dumbledore's eyes cut to hers. You need not. Yes, Hermione said. I need to. Snape's voice was very dry. She is the only one in the room with the nerve to say the thing out loud and the brain to mean it. McGonagall's throat worked. Miss Granger. Hermione didn't look away from the parchment. I would like the boy I love like family to live, she said, simple and devastating. And I would like the world not to burn because we couldn't write a sentence. The quill scratched. The office held its breath. Last clause, Dumbledore said, choosing each word like a stone for a wall that had to hold. No one, no Auror, no unspeakable, no teacher acts on the vow but Gojo Satoru, he alone, or we invite panic with a policy. Good, Gojo said. Then sign. Harry put his name down first. The parchment hummed under his palm, and a small line of light, thin as a filament, traced the scar, then vanished. Gojo signed second. A flare stitched a tiny brand into the web of his right thumb, near the base, nothing showy, but the pain was honest. Hermione leaned in, steadied her hand once, and wrote her name with a pen stroke that didn't wobble. The air changed the way a room, does after vows are spoken, something listening has heard and sat down. Now, Gojo said, rolling his shoulders like a man about to actually start his day. We work. The room of requirement learned new shapes. Gojo asked for a lane and got a long strip of polished wood, chalk lines, and a bell. He asked for noise and got a gallery of portraits who heckled like their lives depended on it. Circulation? Gojo said. Laps, not feet. Energy, count it. Don't leak. Harry ran the wheel with breath like beats. Thread to palm. Heel, rib cage. He had to count and decide and bite the stupid urge to do something flashier. Again. Gojo said every time the thread thinned. Again, Harry said, and did it. Reinforcement, Gojo said next. Bones, then skin. If you overdo it, you'll tear your own muscle. That's dumb. Don't be dumb. Helpful, Ron muttered, timing Harry's holds with a watch and shouting at him when he cheated the count. You cheat, you get a jab. Go ahead, Harry said, flexing until his forearms hummed. I deserve it. Hermione ran drills inside his head. Not legitimacy, not violence. She sat across from him on the floor and walked him through the safe rooms like a teacher giving directions to a first year who'd gotten lost and needed to learn the castle not by maps but by touch. Common room. Library at 6, 5 seconds before kickoff. Now switch. Now switch while I talk fast. Now switch while Ron heckles. Now switch while I tell you Ginny's in trouble and I won't tell you where. He failed twice. The third time he swore and caught himself and switched anyway, and Hermione's grin showed the first real hope he'd let himself believe in that week. Punch, Gojo said, tossing him pads. But not with fear, with decision. Harry punched until his knuckles bled, and then stopped because his anchor said stop was the right call. Good, Gojo said, and meant it in the small way that matters. At night, they read. Hermione's notes became a book of their own. Snape did not enter the room. He sent curt corrections on paper. Not willing prone to rupture, stable under specific breaks. Words matter. Tell him thanks. Hermione said grudgingly, and did. Harry slept for an hour at a time. In one of those hours, the shrine in the Red Sea leaned forward. It said nothing. Harry said, very clearly, "No." The shrine smiled, patient. The owl came just after noon, bruised by Speed the burrow. Immediate. They apparated as a group and hit the yard at a run. Smoke clawed the sky. Someone had set a spell that made suit cling to skin like regret. Molly Weasley's voice cut through it, practical panic. Arthur, water on the back door. Ginny, with me. Fred. George, no, you two do not. Ron vaulted the garden wall and then stopped because the kitchen had become a battlefield staged by a lunatic who loved teacups. The table was overturned. The clock that told where everyone was had spun and stuck on mortal peril like a bad joke. 2 Death Eaters made the mistake of underestimating a mother with a wand. Molly blasted one into the pantry and slammed the door with a charm that turned the wood to iron. The second fired something ugly and green, streaked at Ron. He moved to block for her because that's what he did. The curse clipped his ribs and slid like oil under his skin. Ron swore because he didn't have time to scream. Cold hit him from the inside out. A rot that wasn't just decay but a rule change. His body stopped believing in blood the way it had yesterday. Ron, Ginny, yelled, raw. Ron, I've got him, Arthur said, voice shaking and then not. He put a towel under Ron's head because you always did practical things when you didn't know if the big ones would work. Harry slid in on his knees. He knew about rot and rules. He knew about thresholds. The vow thrummed under his skin like a tripwire in the floorboards. Ron's breath hitched and missed. His eyes went wide and then wider on a thought that didn't make it to his mouth not yet. Molly pressed her hand to the wound and kept pressure, because pressure is what you do. Hermione. What? What do we do? Hermione's mouth had already been moving through every book she'd ever read. This wasn't in them. I don't. Harry. Ron managed. He didn't say don't. He didn't say please. He said the thing he'd practiced in 11 different ways since first year. Your call. The world narrowed to a line of ink at the edge of Harry's jaw. Take it. Harry whispered to the thing that smiled at shrines. He meant it. Save him. The vow woke. Gojo's thumb burned, sharp, clean pain, the little brand flaring like a live coal. A ringing note nobody else could hear went through the room, the sound of a contract claiming debt. Hermione's hand found Harry's sleeve. She didn't pull. She anchored. Sukuna folded into the space Harry gave him like water into a mold it liked. The markings rushed over Harry's cheekbones and down his throat. He reached for Ron without hurry. The world slowed to the speed he liked best, cruel competence. Reverse cursed technique lit his hand. Gold. Not warm, not gentle. The glow looked like a rule undoing itself because someone with better handwriting had written over it. The necrotic curse turned at the wrist like a dog meeting a taller god. Skin filled, color flushed, breath restarted. Ron's eyes snapped wide, and then he sucked in air like it had been withheld as a prank he didn't find funny. Ron. Ginny sobbed. Molly's hand flew to her mouth. Arthur went to his knees, not in worship, in relief he'd have denied later. Sukuna didn't look at them. He turned his head with slow, delighted precision and met Gojo's eyes, as if the two of them had been standing in a quiet room waiting for the party to leave. Finally, he said, and smiled like a blade learning it was needed. Gojo's blindfold was off. Infinity hummed so tightly around him the air bent light. Terms, he said, because he had to say it, because the vow had to hear it. Willing surrender. I act. Then, Sukuna purred. Try not to bore me. The kitchen couldn't hold that. The world stepped sideways. The castle felt it first. Wards groaned. Stone checked its corners. Birds rose from the black lake in a ragged sheet, and then dropped again when the surface began to boil not with heat, but with information too dense for water. On the west side, a buttress cracked a neat line from crenelle to base and then stopped, offended that anyone had written on it without permission. On the lawn, two spaces unfolded at once. Domain expansion, Sukuna said, delighted, and the malevolent shrine bloomed, red banners unfurling over black water, the bone colonnade sketched into the air like a memory made visible. The smell of iron was very clean. Domain expansion. Gojo said, almost bored, and the unlimited void turned the world into a point that kept being a point no matter how close you got to it. Insight became an injury, and then a lesson, and then a joke too big for anyone to find funny. Where they overlapped, reality complained. Back! Everyone back! McGonagall shouted from the steps, shepherding students with the kind of authority that doesn't lose to gods, not even for a minute. Hermione pulled Harry's body behind the carved rail and put his head in her lap. He was there and not, breathing steady, because the vow had given the thing inside him permission, and it had taken it. And now the vow gave Gojo permission, and he would take that, too. Stay with me, she whispered to the part that belonged to common rooms and library tables. Stay. On the lawn, Sukuna moved first. He didn't rush. He doesn't rush. He cut a line through the air, and 3 trees on the far bank of the lake learned they were in 2 minds about being. Gojo didn't block. He wasn't where the cut happened when the cut decided to be. He flicked his wrist. The world hummed between index and middle finger. "Aren't you clever?" Sukuna said, pleased. "I get that a lot," Gojo said. Sukuna stepped. The shrine walked with him. Everywhere his foot might land, a carving already existed. Gojo moved. The void stayed still, and the ground came to him, deciding the shortest distance between 2 points was to be 1 point. "Try," Sukuna offered. "Gladly," Gojo said. Hollow purple built itself in his hand like a thesis you write after a year of not speaking to anyone who thinks sloppily. Red. Blue. A merge that was not just addition but subtraction of everything that didn't belong to the idea of now. He threw it like he was setting a plate down. It crossed the shrine at a polite angle and hit the host. Harry's body lifted and turned. 2 ribs gave before reinforced muscle decided to negotiate. The shoulder tore. Blood came, bright, ordinary, human, and the shrine laughed because pain didn't make it repent. It made it interested. "Again," Sukuna said, and then his head tipped 1/10 of an inch, not toward the damage, but toward the idea of damage. He took a half, breath too long to enjoy himself. Gojo didn't enjoy anything. He did the job the vow had named. The second purple shaved air from the world and left a whole reality filled in with the oldest glue it had to stay put. The shrine's banners snapped. The black water stuttered. Inside the overlap, students watched gods argue with architecture. Outside it, the lake hissed and a buttress complained, and then held because Hogwarts had its pride. Sukuna placed a hand very lightly on his own torn shoulder and smiled in a way that revealed nothing. "I'll fix the toy," he said. "You can stand there and look pleased about the idea of rules." "Fixing is good," Gojo said. "Retreating is better." Sukuna didn't gift him the courtesy of a reply. He turned inward, into the shrine, to repair the host he'd chosen because repair meant fighting later. The domains withdrew, not all at once, but like tides aligning with the moon after a storm. Gojo's knees didn't buckle. He didn't do that in public. He did tie his blindfold back on, because seeing the world too clearly after you've forced it to hold still is like reading in a lightning flash, hard on the head. He stood, breathing like a man who remembered how. Hermione looked down. The markings receded. Harry's eyes opened. Pain sat in them beside relief and anger. He sucked a breath through his teeth. "Hurts." "Good," Gojo said, and didn't soften it. "If it didn't, I'd be worried." Ron propped himself on an elbow, color back in his face. "You hit my best mate with a god cannon. He asked for a rule to save you, and I enforced it," Gojo said. "Complain to the contract." Ron's mouth worked. Then he nodded, once. "Thanks." Molly sat down very hard on the steps and covered her face with both hands. After a second she took them away and stood, because there were children to count and a kitchen to scrub and a life to insist on keeping. Hogwarts breathed. A hairline crack laddered across the west buttress, then held. The lake settled. Birds decided the sky was safe again. Some of the portraits went very quiet and stayed that way for an hour because pride needed space. It took 2 walks around the ward before Pomfrey would let Susan near him with the basin. "I can clean my own hands," Harry said, a lie with no spine. "You can," Susan agreed, wringing a cloth in hot water. "And I can, and mine will shake less." He opened his palms. Blood had dried in a ladder of brown smears across his knuckles. When she touched the cloth to them, the heat bit. He kept still. "How many?" she asked, soft. "Ribs." "2." His throat rasped where shouting would have been if he'd done any. "Purple is a lot," she said, and smiled like she couldn't quite help it. "You'll have a mark. People will ask." "I'll say I fell down the stairs," he said, and even he laughed because sometimes you need to. Her thumb worked a streak out of the cut at his ring finger. It wasn't a lover's touch. It was human steady. "You gave it the wheel," she said, because avoiding it would be worse. "To save Ron." "I did," he said. "He didn't justify. He didn't rinse it in noble. We made terms for that. And he honored them," she said. "Good." He flexed his fingers and winced, and she didn't say poor thing. She said, "Hold still," and finished. "Thanks," he said, and meant more than the basin. "You're here," she said, same as before, and put the cloth back in the bowl. Tag Hermione stood in Dumbledore's office, ink on her fingers, the text of the vow in her head like a sprung trap that had caught the right animal. The castle had stopped vibrating. The world would start up again in the morning and pretend this was ordinary. It wasn't. Dumbledore wrote 3 letters in quick, neat hand. "To the Ministry," he said. "To the Board. To the Prophet. Will it help?" she asked. "It will hold," he said. Helping is a later verb. She looked at her hands. They didn't tremble now. That seemed unfair. "We need more anchors," she said. "Noise resistant. Pain resistant. Public. Write them." Dumbledore said, "I will make sure he has time to learn them." She nodded. "And Gojo. A will stay," Dumbledore said, with the faintest ghost of a smile. "Pride likes a problem." Hermione turned toward the window. The lake looked like nothing had happened to it. That was a trick. She decided to be tricked for an hour, and then get back to work. The sky went the color of old tin before the first horn blew. Positions. Hermione's voice carried because it needed to. Squad A, North Parapet. Squad B, Courtyard Inner Ring. Giants sighted east, trip lines only. Dementors in the tree line. Do not chase. Names and roles snapped into place. Neville with me on vines. Hannah Triage Runner. Dean Shield Caller. Padma. Count our minutes. Minutes. Padma asked, already tying her hair back. "That's what we win," Hermione said. "Not glory. Minutes." They'd had 8 to plan. It was enough to be specific. CE reinforced Protego. She told the nearest cluster, DA, a string of 5th years, Flickwick with chalk on his cuffs. McGonagall already looking like the last word in hold. Simple flow. No flourishes. Thread to palm, intent to hold, not bash. On my count. She lifted her hand. 4 out. 2 hold. 4 in. Now. Protego. Shields rose, dozens, blue arcs overlapping. The first test hex hit and slid, the way rain does off treated glass. "Good," Hermione said. Brawlers pair with casters. If you punch, you get a shadow with a wand. If you cast, you get a wall with hands. Rotates squads every 3 minutes, no heroes. Who leads second rotation? McGonagall asked, already knowing. "Ginny," Hermione said. "Then Dean, then Susan takes triage command. We keep the lanes clear. If you're not bleeding, you're not in the ward." You heard the girl. Aberforth grunted from the gate. Save the sighing for after. The horn blew again. Giants moved in the trees like the idea of hills learning to walk. Dementors poured low, dragging cold behind them. Death Eaters flashed white masks in neat wedges. It wasn't a raid. It was a commitment. Hermione lifted her arm. "Begin." Left shoulder. Dean called. Giant one. Angle, Hermione said, and the tripping hexes went low, not high. 3 brawlers Ron, Seamus, Michael hit reinforced banishers on the giant's ankles, while 4 casters braided ropes. The giant stepped where the ground used to be and met the courtyard with his face. The stones shuddered but held. Dementor's front. Ginny warned, voice tight. Patronus, now. Hermione threaded CE with the shape of her stag. The light came clean, not bright, steady. Hold your animal. Don't shout your feelings. Give it a job. Job. A 3rd year squeaked, eyes huge. Guard that door, Hermione said, pointing to the arch into the great hall. 4 steps wide. Don't let cold get past you. The 3rd year nodded, breathing hard but obeying, a silver terrier planting itself exactly where told. A killing curse sliced along the top of the inner ring. McGonagall didn't duck. She stepped into it and let it split around her as if she were a pillar the world needed. Protego, renew, Hermione called. Swap brawlers. Seamus water jet on the flaming cart. Don't feed smoke into our own lungs, thanks. Ron laughed once, short, as he ducked a hex and swept a giant's ankle again. On it. The first wave broke like waves dewy, messy, loud, confused. The tactic worked because it wasn't fancy. Giants went down to geometry. Dementors stalled on purposeful light. Death Eaters learned that tripping into a shield you couldn't see coming was as humiliating as it sounded. Switch, Hermione called. We don't stand still. New pairings. Potter, Kingsley rumbled. With me on the south. You're not a spear tip, you're a floorjack. Copy? Harry said, already moving. She took the great hall and turned it into a ward in under a minute. Beds on the right, walking wounded left of the line, downed on the right. Lavender, pulse check. Ernie, compressions if I say. 3rd years, fresh water at every bed. No one faints here. If you need to, you step outside and do it neatly. A boy came in with a slice across his scalp, blood in his eye, and not crying because there was no time. Name, Cormac. Sit. Pressure here, she said, guiding his hand. Good, look at the floor. Count tiles. Not problems. He did. The blood slowed. Runner, she called. Take this to Madame Pomfrey. 3 doses fever tincture, 2 of dragon's breath burn paste, 1 stomach calmer. People will be sick when the fear breaks. Be ready. The runner flew. Harry ducked into the ward doorway, breath visible in the Dementor's wake, eyes checking the whole room before they landed on her. You good? He asked. I'm working, Susan said. You. He looked like someone had put a weight on his shoulders and he had decided to be taller. Holding. She pointed the cloth at his mouth. Wipe. He obeyed without argument. Blood or smoke, either way it didn't need to be there. Listen to me, she said, because this was the only window she'd get. You are not a bomb. His mouth twitched. Argument for another day. No, she said. Now, you're a person. Fight like one. That means decisions, not blasts. You pull back when fear asks for stupid. You push when it's your call, not his. He held her eyes for one hard beat. Kopi, go, she said, and he went. Susan turned to a girl shivering with Dementor cold and wrapped a warmed blanket around shoulders that felt too small. Say what you see, she told her. Count the windows. Name the color of the stone. The girl did, voice shaking but present, and the cold slipped. A 3rd year boy grabbed her sleeve. My brother, outside. We'll bring him in, she said. You, deep breaths, 10 of them. Then you help me with water. Deal, deal, he whispered, and didn't cry. She wanted him to. She needed him not to. Patronus variants work, she reported to Dumbledore in the brief space between volleys. If they put jobs on them, they don't burn out. The light holds when it has a purpose. Purpose is a fine fuel. Dumbledore said, eyes already on the south wall. They learn from us. We learn from them.
Rotate again,
Hermione shouted. No one passed 4 minutes in the ring. Language Granger, Ron called, grinning despite the dirt on his face. It's please and thank you where I'm from. Please don't be an idiot. Thank you, she shot back. Better? He said, then dropped a Death Eater with a CE-backed hook that would have made a Muggle boxer proud. Next. The first flock of Dementors broke and regrouped in the grove near the greenhouses. Hermione watched them pattern. Always a pattern. Dean, she said, they're tracking spikes. Every time Harry surges, they turn like birds. How do we hide a bonfire? Dean asked. Make it a steady stove, Hermione said. Tell him hum, don't flare. Dean cupped his hands and bellowed over the ring. Potter! Hum. Harry turned his head. Got it. And smoothed the thread in his chest like he was rubbing a knot out of rope. The Dementors hesitated, just a beat, and their turn lost sharpness. Good call, Gojo said quietly from the steps behind her. She glanced back. He looked wrong, and not because of blood. He was rationing. His presence felt like someone had turned Infinity down to a careful setting, so it didn't eat the field by accident. How empty? She asked. Not funny empty, he said. Useful empty. He twitched 2 fingers without lifting his hand, and a slab of fallen masonry that had been about to crush 3 younger students didn't. It hung, reconsidered, and settled politely aside. Thank you, Hermione said. Your stove line was better, he said, and even winded he found room for the small praise that keeps engines running. Keep them humming. I'll keep the roof on. She stepped through a gap in the north wall like a promise, and found Harry in a corridor that smelled of whetstone and sweat. The ward light made his markings look like ink the skin had decided to reject. 2 steps behind him, Hermione. 4 to his right, Ron. Bellatrix lifted her hands to show no wand. It meant nothing. It meant conversation. Hello, Shrine, she said, bright, hungry. Don't call me that, Harry said. He didn't reach for anything. He set his feet. The difference mattered. Then I'll call you useful, she purred. Information for a private minute. Speak, Hermione said, now with witnesses. My lord dislikes witnesses, Bellatrix said, amused. I dislike orders. She tipped her head toward the grove. Second wave uses the water runnel under the greenhouses. It empties into the willow crease. Your pretty stags won't see them there until they're in your teeth. Why tell us? Ron asked, not lowering his wand. Because I want your shrine unspoiled when I come to kneel, she said, and watched Harry's mouth for the flinch. It didn't come. Interesting. Harry's jaw set. I'm not your shrine. I'm not anyone's altar. She smiled like that was adorable. You will be mine for 5 minutes. That's all I ask. Deanied, Hermione said, and her voice could have cut the hall. We don't barter people. Bellatrix laughed once, delighted. Oh, you're good. I like good. She leaned, conspiratorially, like they were girls in a dorm trading secrets. There's a scythe, marked Death Eater with the second wave. He's the handler for the Dementors. Remove him and their turn slows. Hermione didn't deny the utility. Name? Ruck, Bellatrix said. He thinks it makes him sound like a verb. Why help us cut your own men? Ron said. She lifted a shoulder. He bores me. I want the other duel. Her gaze returned to Harry like a hand. I will come when the walls are thinnest. Make sure your floor holds. Harry's lip curled. Try the door. It's locked. Yes, she said softly. Locks are fun. She pivoted and slid back into shadow like it belonged to her. Hermione exhaled slowly. We use it, she said. We don't invite her back. Agreed,
Harry said.
Ginny, he called, and when she appeared, hair wild, eyes bright, he gave quick, clean orders. Willow crease. Water runnel. Handler named Ruck. Slow their turn. On it, Ginny said, and sprinted. They came in a lower line, hugging the ground, banking to where Harry's fear used to flare. It didn't. The stove hum held because he kept thinking stupid, simple thoughts like cup in hand and sofa arm under wrist while shouting real instructions. Rotate, Hermione called. If your Patronus flickers, change its job. Don't make it fight your nostalgia. Give it something to do. What? A Ravenclaw asked, jaw clenched. Guard the threshold, Hermione said. Count the steps. Stay on 2. 2, the girl said, and the silver crane steadied. Ruck appeared where Bellatrix said he would, thin, pleased with himself, a brand like a hook on his cheek. He lifted his wand like a conductor, and the Dementors turned with him, neat as soldiers. Got you, Ron muttered. He didn't cast. He didn't shout. He moved with 2 brawlers and came up under the man's guard with a CE-backed punch that snapped Ruck's head against the postern. The wand dropped. Hermione's body bind was crisp. Neville dragged him into the courtyard and trussed him like a sack. The Dementors turned lost shape. They swarmed still, but without that awful precision. Good, Hermione said. Keep the stove on. Don't feed the cold. Kopi came back from 10 throats. The alarm bell had a rhythm now, short, short, long for the south, long, short for the north. Between the rings, there were tiny moments where a human could remember they had a mouth for something other than orders. Harry hit the stone by the infirmary corridor and braced. Susan was there with a fresh tray and a towel, hair tied, sleeves rolled. You're bleeding again, she said. It's fashionable, he said, tired, and then quieter. Are you all right? Cataloging, she said. I'll fall apart later at a reasonable hour. She lifted the towel and reached for his cheek, then stopped, hand a breath off his skin. Yes, yes, he said, and held still. She wiped the blood away. The touch wasn't tender. It was careful, honest. She looked at his mouth for half a second and looked back to his eyes. Not now. Not now, he agreed, and a smile tried to be born. The bell hammered out the long short. They both turned. Later, she said. Later? He echoed and ran. He took a squad of terrified 4th years and made them a wall. Eyes up, feet down. If you have to be sick, turn your head left and commit. No one slips on your breakfast today. One laughed, shocked into it. Good. A giant leaned into their lane. Trip line, Ron yelled, and 3 hexes went neat and low. The giant thundered forward, hit the nothing they'd made, and folded. See, even mountains take naps. A Death Eater tried to look brave in front of children. Ron bared his teeth and stepped in, not pretty, not clever, just present, and the man tripped over his own fear. Next, Ron said, heart hammering, and the 4th years tightened their grips on their wands like they'd been given permission to be brave. Protego renew, he shouted. On my 3, 1, 2, now. Their shields overlapped. It was ugly and perfect. A squad broke near the south arch. Too many curses, not enough breath. Gojo saw it out of the corner of his eye and let infinity tip. A dozen killing curses arrived at once and discovered they did not arrive at all. They hung in the air like bad thoughts over a bed and went out, neatly like candles with lids placed over them. Thanks. Kingsley panted. Bill me, Gojo said, and almost sat down on the steps out of habit. He didn't, because habit kills speed. He turned his face toward Hermione on the ring. Good call on the stove. They listen better to doing than to feeling. That's my department. She called back, not looking away from her line. Sweat ran into her eyes. She didn't blink. Keep him from spiking when he sees children. Gojo said, very quiet, very precise. That's his leak. I know, she said, equally quiet, equally exact. We're fixing it. He twitched his fingers again and a wall that had been planning to fall reconsidered its schedule. Rotate. Renew. Breathe. She didn't let her voice shake. There would be time later to feel like a child. Now she was a metronome with a spine. She watched for the small collapses, the hands that trembled, the eyes that went too wide. She walked to them, named something boring, made a joke, pressed a potion into a palm, assigned a job. Jobs kept people upright. Padma, count. 37 minutes held, Padma reported, calm even as soot smudged her cheek. North wall stable. East pressure rising. Switch. Ginny on east. Dean north. Susan. Status? Treege holding. Susan called from the arch. 2 to Pomfrey for surgery. No losses. Not on my floor. Good, Hermione said, and meant it like a prayer in a language that didn't need gods. The Dementors tried another adaptation, lower again, sneaking under shields to grief that sat too close to the skin. Hermione felt it, a tug at the edges of her oldest memory. She didn't let it in. Change jobs, she yelled. If your Patronus falters, send it to a task doors. Stairs, names on a list. Task don't cry. They steadied. Doors held. He worked the stove. Hum, not flare. He punched when he needed to. CE tight. Chosen, not because anger told him to. He split one Avada and didn't smile. He saw a child and kept breathing like someone counting tiles. Sukuna pressed, curious. You are useful when you're calm, the idea said in the shape of a thought that wasn't his. I'm a person when I'm calm, Harry answered, out loud to himself, because sometimes words need air, and when I'm not. He felt the shrine's amusement. He ignored it. Library at 6. The sofa arm. 5 seconds before kickoff. He held all 3 and still found room to lift Ron's elbow when his friend's punch went too wide. Thanks. Ron gasped. Anytime, Harry said, and meant it. A Death Eater tried the old trick with a hostage, dragging a 7th-year boy into the open with a wand driven so hard into his temple it left a mark. Drop. No, Harry said simply, and walked in until the man's eyes broke first. You let him go and run while your legs still remember how. He didn't threaten. He didn't posture. He let the man look at the quiet and decide. The man ran. The boy sagged. Hermione's hand was already on his shoulder, turning him, sending him to Trige. Good, Gojo said from somewhere to his left. Useful is quiet. Not a bomb, Harry said, and something like a smile hit the corner of his mouth and died there, because now was not for smiles. They held the courtyard. The giants learned about floors. The Dementors learned about doors. Death Eaters learned about elbows and decisions, and the way a line of students can be a wall if the person at the front won't let it turn into a queue. When the second horn finally called the retreat, no one cheered. They breathed. Breathing felt like a luxury. "Don't chase," Hermione said, voice hoarse. "We hold what we have. Count," Padma said before being asked. 61 minutes. "Minutes 1," Hermione said, and swallowed hard because saying it made her body remember water existed. "Good work. Rotate to water. Check your people. Then we check the walls." She looked up. The wards shimmered thin as an eggshell held to light. "Headmaster," she said, because it helped to say names even when you were being the one other people said. "We need reinforcement on the west seam." "On our way," Dumbledore answered, already moving. Gojo sank onto the steps and let infinity rest like a heavy coat shrugged off at the end of a day. "Don't get used to me," he told Hermione. "I'm not a crutch." "I'm not planning to lean," she said. "But thank you for catching what needed catching." He tipped 2 fingers, acknowledgement, not swagger. "You did the better math." Susan came to the arch with her final list, jaw set, eyes clear. "No deaths," she reported. "Too bad. Both breathing. Pomfrey is a dragon." "Don't tell her I said that." "I will," Hermione said. "She'll take it as a compliment." Susan looked at Harry. They didn't need words. He nodded once. She nodded back. Partnership is sometimes a quiet, practical thing you build while other people try to tear down your house. Bellatrix watched from a roofline for a minute longer, hungry as a stray, and smiled to herself without joy. "Soon," she murmured, and vanished before the next rotation could catch her shadow. The wards hummed thin. The sunset came like someone had forgotten to turn the day off. Hermione rubbed the grit from her eyes and lifted her chin. "Same again," she said to the gathered faces. "We'll rest in turns. We eat with hands that shake. We sharpen once. We don't break. Copy," came the answer from a dozen voices, then a dozen more. She allowed herself one breath that shuddered. Then she went back to counting minutes. He wakes sitting on cold stone, not Hogwarts stone. The other kind, the kind that looks polished because hands learned it long ago. The Red Sea that used to press right up to the steps has fallen back a little, as if the tide forgot how to be tall. The shrine is cracked where hollow purple went through him. A diagonal fault across one pillar, a chip out of the altar's lip, banners frayed. Sukuna sits on the steps like he owns every stair in the world. Elbows on knees, chin propped on the back of one hand. 4 eyes amused. "Back so soon?" he says. Harry rubs his shoulder out of habit. Pain answers, "Good. Real. Didn't leave." "You left a door ajar," Sukuna says. "I chose to wait in here where the conversation is honest." He pats the step next to him as if offering a seat. Harry stays standing. "Choice." Sukuna says, pleased. "Good. Let's make more of those." The Red Sea shivers and laps at the first step as if to remind him who flooded the hall in the first place. The crack on the right column creaks like old ice settling. "Your friend's toy stung," Sukuna says, glancing at the fault line as if admiring the mark. "Effective. Not fatal. It made you interesting again." "Glad to be entertainment," Harry says. "What do you want?" "The same thing I offered you before," Sukuna says, and the corners of his mouth tilt, lazy and sure. A world without the stupid, loud parts. No pain, no grief. No dithering old men writing letters while houses burn. I tell it to be quiet, and it obeys. You get to live without losing anything you love. Harry snorts before he can help it. "You don't know what I love." "Little jokes," Sukuna says at once. "Cheap sweets." A glance at the far, off-ceiling board. Warm rooms that smell like old paper. names said in a certain order because the sound makes you feel tall. He leans back on his hands, eyes half-lidded. I give you order. I remove cost. Your girl with the steady hands keeps wiping blood from people you like, but only from nosebleeds after Quidditch. Your boy with the clenched jaw stops pretending he isn't afraid. Your clever one reads because she wants to, not because the world refuses to carry its own weight. You make it painless. Harry says flat. I make it quiet. Sukuna says. You mistake noise for living. Harry looks at the red water. He can smell iron if he lets himself. He doesn't. You're offering me a library with no late fees, he says, and all the books are blank. Sukuna laughs. Honest, quick. Finally, a good line from you. He gestures toward the altar. Say yes. We can end it without more broken stairs. No, Harry says. Because, Sukuna prompts, interested in the shape of the refusal. Harry picks something small and true, because I like how the library smells at 6. Parchment, dust, polish. It stings your nose a little. It means people were there. That is not an argument. Sukuna says, it is for me. Sukuna's smile thins. You think you can build a life out of candle scents and crumbs. I think pain isn't a glitch, Harry says. It's a receipt. He keeps it simple, because Hermione drilled that into him, no speeches. We pay because some things are worth buying. And you think you can afford it. Sukuna says, I think I can afford some, Harry says. That's my scale, not yours. Sukuna watches him for a long second, eyes unreadable, like a cat deciding whether to get up. Make your toy rooms. Then, he says finally, I want to see if you remember how. Harry doesn't answer. He looks at the Red Sea, takes a breath that he counts because counting works, and starts. Common room first. Not the idea, the room. He plants his feet at the edge of the step, lifts his hands, and thinks small, Hermione's voice in his head. Precise, make the idea small. Don't muscle it. Intent first. He presses a palm down and writes stone over red, not all at once. A flagstone, size square. The act costs him. It drags at breath and focus the way stepping into wind does. The square holds. He presses again. Another square beside the first. The red water pulls at the edges like it wants to wick up through the seams. He seals the seam. It takes twice the effort of making the square did. Sweat runs down his back. He doesn't let it distract him. 3 more, he tells himself. Then a chair. He lays 3 more plates of stone and shapes a low, familiar sofa arm at knee height. The fabric isn't right the first time. It tries to be velvet. He shakes his head and flattens it to the lumpy old weave Gryffindor couldn't afford to replace for 20 years. That feels true. The arm looks right. He puts his wrist on it. The Red Sea pulls. He hums his stove instead of flaring. The seam stops wicking. Sukuna watches from the steps, bored on purpose. All this for a room where you learn to rewrite other people's rules. Exactly, Harry says. He adds a table. It wants to be perfect. He scuffs the corner with his thumb until it has that dent Ron always complained about catching his sleeve. The dent makes the table real. Library. He turns. He lifts his hand and writes shelves. Not 4 stories. 1 wall, waist high, with stacks of battered, coarse texts. He adds a specific book. A history of magic with a fraying spine and Hermione's notes in the margin. He makes the ink blot on page 90, to where she once fell asleep mid-sentence. It takes effort to make it that small. It's easier to make grand things. He refuses the easy. He lights a fire. Not a roaring blaze. A mean little crackle. He cheats the first flame with a spark of CE to convince the wood to believe in itself. He hates that he has to. He keeps it anyway. He doesn't trust perfection. He trusts stubborn. The fire's smell arrives a beat after the light. The shrine's hall takes it in like a new rule it didn't agree to but can't ignore. Sukuna taps 2 fingers on his knee. Tap, tap, cute. Harry doesn't turn. He puts 2 chairs by the low table. One has a sag where Ron always sat crooked. The second is straight, backed. He tells himself that one is for Hermione, even if she would never sit still in it for long. The thought steadies him. He adds a narrow window high in the wall and lets in the kind of light that doesn't exist at the bottom of a red sea. The light wavers once and then decides to be a square on the floor. He doesn't smile. Tea, he says to himself under his breath, and immediately stops because he knows that's tempting fate. He doesn't need props. He needs the room to hold with nothing in his hands. He keeps building, shelf by shelf, stone by stone. He stops to breathe when the edges of his sight glitter, and then goes again. After a while his hands start to shake. He braces them on his knees and looks at what he's made. It isn't big, but it's real. The sea hisses at the edges. He ignores it. Sukuna stands without sound and takes 2 steps across the new floor. He plants his heel on the seam between stones like a man checking for hollow ground. "It won't drown you now," he says, conversational, "but it will try to borrow your breath." "Then I won't loan it," Harry says. Still not an argument. Sukuna says and moves, a blur, his hand coming up and around with ugly speed. Harry's body answers the old way, drilled, careful, human. He catches the wrist, turns, and feels bones he can't break because they're all him. Sukuna laughs. It's not cruel this time. It's delighted. "You learn to fight like you meant it," he says, and throws Harry. Harry hits the new table. The dent he'd remembered saves his hip from a sharper edge. His breath goes out. He sucks in air and refuses to try to win a fight he can't win here. "No," he says to his fists. He lowers them. He stands and goes back to the wall. Sukuna blinks once, slow. "You're not going to finish the dance." "I'm going to finish the room," Harry says. "You can watch or you can sulk. I'm busy." Sukuna's grin shows the knife again. "Good, work while you bleed." Harry does. He doesn't know how long it takes to make a room big enough to stand in without feeling like a rat in a trap. Time in the domain is peculiar. The Red Sea draws back in small soaks. Each retreat costs him. Each retreat proves he can make it retreat again. He makes an alcove that fits one person and the idea of silence. He puts a fake window there, too. That shows nothing except a gray sky that doesn't judge. He adds the broom shadow that cuts across the floor when someone's coming down from the tower late. The shadow's wrong the first time. He fixes it. Making one shadow right is harder than filling a hall with torches. He keeps at it anyway. When his hands stop shaking, he lets himself think of people. He thinks of Hermione saying, "Name what's in the room." He says quietly, "Table, chair, fire, shelf, ink blot." He says, "Sofa arm." He says, "Dust." He says, "Light." He thinks of Ron telling a 4th year, "If you have to be sick, turn left and commit." The memory is ridiculous and perfect. Harry snorts. The fire likes the laugh. It steadies. He thinks of Susan in the ward, her voice level. "We catalog and treat. You're here." He doesn't say "my shrine." He says, "I'm here." The floor feels that affirmation like weight. He thinks of Bellatrix's mouth on the word, "mine," and the pull in it, the gravity of worship dressed up as devotion, the promise of an easy collapse. His chest goes hot, then cold. He labels it danger. He puts the label on a shelf. He doesn't throw it out. He refuses it the front seat, choosing the kind of love you can stand to carry. He says out loud, because that's Hermione's phrase exactly, is not a moral. It's a survival trick. Sukuna cocks his head, entertained. And you chose the quiet one. I chose the one who keeps me human, Harry says. You think she will not tire. Sukuna says. You think steadiness isn't its own kind of worship. It is, Harry says. But it doesn't ask me to kneel. Sukuna's eyes narrow into something like interest that isn't unkind. You're learning to make precise cuts, he says. At last. Harry turns back to the wall. A thought brushes the edge of his mind at the same time his hand hits a seam he hadn't noticed. The seam runs not along stone but under it, down into the red, toward the altar, then up, toward the scar that sits in this space as a fixed star, always there whether he looks at it or not. He kneels and puts his palm flat. The seam thrums, not like the sea, like a wire. He follows it with the heel of his hand. It passes under the fire, dips under the table, climbs the step, kisses the altar's corner, and vanishes into the cracked pillar. When he presses one finger into the crack and whispers, "Show me the map," the crack answers with a thin, black pulse. It is not Sukuna's rhythm. It's older, familiar in the worst way. Tom Riddle's handwriting, if it were a drumbeat. He sits back on his heels, breath shallow. The shrine watches. Sukuna does not move. Ah, Sukuna says softly. There you are. The Horcrux, Harry says almost to himself. Not the piece in the diary or the ring. This one. The one that made the scar. The negative keystone. The reason I'm the right shape for you to fit. The words make his mouth taste like old pennies. He says them anyway. Yes, Sukuna says. He does not preen. He doesn't need to. You were the best bowl on the shelf. Harry closes his eyes. The room holds under his knees. He breathes the count. 4 out. 2 hold. 4 in. 1 hold. Can I pull it? He asks the air. You can't. Sukuna says. It is built into the concrete. He taps the cracked pillar without touching it. Remove it with a pry bar and the hall comes down. You don't have the hands for the rubble. Not with a bar, Harry says. With a needle. Sukuna's smile shows a hint of teeth. Say the rest. A domain? Harry says. Small, inside, not out. Not the big kind that breaks floors. The kind you use for stitches. Microscopic. Sukuna says, savoring the word because he likes lovingly difficult violence. Surgical. You aim wrong by a breath and carve your own lungs. Harry doesn't look away. Less. Sukuna watches him like a teacher pretending not to be proud. Do you know why most of your kind fail at precision? Because we like speeches? Harry says. Precision hates speeches. Sukuna laughs, quick. Make your needle, then. Harry clamps his mouth shut to keep anything wise from leaking out and ruining the thing that might save him. He looks at the seam again. He puts 2 fingers on the crack and traces where it goes. Into the pillar. Into the altar. Under the sea. Back to the place behind his own ear where the scar's pulse lives in this map. He needs a domain the size of a seed. He needs it to sit in his hands without burning through. He needs it to eat exactly 1 splinter, not the table, not the chair, not the fire, not the Red Sea, not yet, not the altar, not yet, not himself. He practices. He cups his palms and shapes a black point the size of a poppy seed. It wants to widen. He refuses. It wants to hum. He makes it hum quietly.
Inside, not out.
he says, Hermione's cadence in his mouth. Make the idea small. He keeps it small until sweat runs down his temple, and it doesn't slop over the side of his hands onto his wrists. He lets it vanish. He breathes. He makes it again. Smaller. Closer to a pinhead. The point shivers. He breathes with it until it holds. He thinks of Ron's worst joke. Chudley cannons are winning the cup this year. I can feel it in my bones. He lets a smile wreck his mouth for 1 second. The point steadies, as if it likes that the world has room for an idiot's hope. He thinks of Susan's clean, no fuss tone. You're here. He answers himself. I'm here. The point accepts the answer like payment. He thinks of Bellatrix's whisper, my shrine, and the way his skin tried to lean toward ruin just to see how it felt. He names the pull danger, not destiny, and the point holds, unimpressed with drama. He thinks of Gojo's voice when the vow woke, steady even with blood on his hands. Terms. He nods once to nothing. Terms, he says. I do the cutting. You don't get a say. Sukuna rolls a shoulder and looks at his nails. If you lance it, the hall will sway. I'll be on the floor, Harry says. Not the stairs. He looks at the common room he built. He looks at the shelf with the ink blot. He looks at the fire that refuses to perform. If it sways, it sways. The table has a dent. It's good at catching me. He cups the seed again. This time he doesn't let it hum. He makes it listen. Inside, not out. He says once, like a password that isn't magic. The seed agrees. He sets his knees against the stone. He puts his left hand on the seam, palm flat, fingers spread. He brings the seed in his right hand toward the crack in the pillar, slow, steady, refusing speed for accuracy. Breathe. He hears Hermione say in memory, 4 out, 2 hold, 4 in, 1 hold. He breathes. Wah, catalog and treat. Susan says in his head, the ward in her voice. He answers, treat. Turn left and commit. Ron says, stupid and perfect. He snorts because he can't help it and adjusts his angle by a hair. Sukuna doesn't move. He doesn't interfere. He wants to see if the child can thread a needle through his own skull without poking out his eye. Harry slides the seed into the crack. Pain nephews behind his right ear. He expected it. He refuses to flinch and ruin the line. The seed touches something that feels like a shard stuck in wet wood. Tom Riddle breathes in his head. Harry says, no. Not at Sukuna. Not at the sea, but at the shard. You don't live here anymore. The seed flares. He keeps it small. Inside, he says again, not out. The shard resists with the stupid, stubborn pride of a curse that spent years believing it was cleverer than children. The room tilts. The fire gutters. The Red Sea licks the stones and then pulls back, surprised to find itself surprised. Harry holds the needle steady and remembers the exact weight of a library book in his left palm and the scratch of a quill when it catches, and the taste of treacle tart, and the way Madame Pince clears her throat once before she glares. He remembers Susan's fingers letting go of a teacup at the exact second his did. He remembers Gojo's dry physics. He remembers Dumbledore's tired. We begin with protection. He remembers Snape's bitten off flavor and refuses to be that ever again. The shard cracks, a sound like a breath drawn after years. Sukuna's head tilts. He doesn't smile. He doesn't frown. He watches like a craftsman who thought a rivet couldn't be undone and just found out it could. Harry keeps the seed exactly where it is, inside. He repeats, gentle now because gentleness helps with cuts, not out. The shard crumbles, slow, not dramatic. It wants a show. He doesn't give it one. He gives it the dignity of ending like a bad idea erased in a margin. When the last grain goes, the seam under his hand stops humming. He stays very still so the room doesn't fall in love with movement and decide to take it away from him. The Red Sea draws back another step, not because he told it to, because the hall's math changed. Sukuna exhales once, a small sound. A. Harry doesn't look at him. He looks at his hands. They're steady. It's out, he says to the stone. Not all of it. Sukuna says, honest. You can't scrape me. You can only stop being the shape I like best. That's enough. Harry says. He opens his palm. The seed is gone. He lets himself fall back onto the sofa arm he made and laughs, once because it caught him exactly where he planned. And planning working feels like a miracle you paid for with boredom and counted breaths. The fire settles. The light on the floor doesn't flicker. Somewhere in the dark of the hall beyond the room he built, the Red Sea accepts new edges. Sukuna stands on the altar step, bare feet leaving no mark. You did not win, he says.
I didn't try,
Harry says. I took away your favorite trick. Sukuna's mouth curves. And you think that makes you safe. No, Harry says. It makes me me. He sits up and looks at the table. The dent is still there. He puts his wrist on it. He lets the room hold. Sukuna tips his head, a gesture that could be respect or hunger. Make more rooms, he says. I want to see if you can live in them when the walls outside start asking for your blood again. I will, Harry says, because I'm planning to open one more thing. Sukuna's eyes gleam. A door. A door. Harry says, small, but this time in my own skull, not yours. He breathes, sets his hands as if holding a cup, and whispers the shape of the seed again, not for the pillar, not for the hall, but for the line that still ties him to the scar in the world where the bodies are. Inside, he says, not out. The common room he built flickers once and then steadies. The black point forms, obedient and mean. He cups it like a coal he means to swallow. When I wake up, he says, we finish it. He looks at the shrine. Sukuna looks back. Stay, Harry says. For now, Sukuna says, and sits like a king on a broken throne. Harry closes his eyes and breathes the count one more time. The stove hums. The fire holds. The seed waits in his hands like a promise aimed inward. He opens the door out. The wards were thin to silk. He tasted their old pride and stepped through anyway. The ritual rode on his shoulders like a tame storm siphon first, savor second. No theatrics. Walk the quiet corridors. Follow the thread he had woven across years, the one that tied his failure to the boy's scar. He entered the hospital wing as if it were a chapel built for him by slow-minded monks. The boy lay too still, not asleep, edged. The black markings on his face breathed like ash. Hello, Harry, Voldemort said, voice pitched lower than a hiss, higher than a whisper, the way a knife sounds when it comes out of a drawer. No reply. No need. He raised his wand. The ritual circle uncoiled from memory and inked itself across air, thin, precise lines that curved toward the scar. Siphon, split, devour, take back what should never have left him. He began to pull. A second voice, inside the silence, laughed. Not human. Not his. Voldemort's fingers tightened. The pull met resistance, not in the wand, not in the air, but in a stubborn refusal under the boy's skin. He bared his teeth and pushed. South Hall breach. Padma whispered, white, faced at the ward door. It's him. Hermione didn't run. She moved the way people move who know what they practiced was not for show. Positions, she said. No spells past the threshold. If he throws, we split, not stack. Gojo. Ear, Gojo said, on his feet already, blindfold in place, hands loose at his sides. Infinity held like a quiet decision. Hermione reached Harry's bed and saw it. The stillness that meant thinking hard with the inside of your head. His hands were empty. His breath was thin and counted. Harry, she said, low. You said you had a door. Harry's eyes opened. They were his and not. Two voices lived behind them and did not struggle. One act, he said, calm, bounded. My terms. Sukuna's smile lived at the corner of his mouth for the space of a blink. 1. Voldemort sneered at the conference he could not hear. Enough. Avada. Green tore the air. Harry's body bucked. Heart stopped. Hermione's hand was already on his shoulder. Inside, she whispered, the word they had built to mean do it here. Gold lit Harry's palms. Reverse cursed technique turned mean and exact, not mercy, repair. 1 beat. 2. The heart restarted under her fingers, an ugly kick, then rhythm. Harry sat up, breath burning. Now. Gojo said nothing. He did not move. The line they had written was intact. He had rehearsed this with sweat in his palms and a cup that stayed steady because of stubbornness. Now he opened the small door he'd made at the end of Chapter 6 and walked through without moving. Inside, not out. The world narrowed to the room he had built common. Room stone over red, fire that didn't perform, shelves low and real, an ink blot on page 92. The seam under the floor hummed last time. It did not now. Good. The crack in the pillar still held Tom Riddle's old breath like a bad note in a good song. He cupped his hands. The seed formed black, poppy small, listening. Find the shard, he said to it, because sometimes you ask tools for help, and they give it if you are not arrogant. Only that. Sukuna sat on the altar step and watched like a craftsman at a rival's bench. Aim wrong and I take you for payment, he said pleasantly. I won't, Harry said. He set his left palm on the crack and slid the seed in with his right. Inside, he breathed, not out. Pain arrived without drama. A nail behind the ear, a hand in his jaw. He catalogued it and did not honor it. Hermione's remembered voice make the idea small. Don't muscle it. Ron's stupidest joke unspooled in his head and steadied his grip cannons for the cup. Idiot, brother. Susan's steadiness sat beside the fire like a chair that would not tip. You're here. The seed touched the splinter. It did not explode. It resisted like a knot that didn't know it could be untied. No, Harry said, gentle. You don't live here anymore. He tightened the domain until it was a needle and pressed. The shard cracked. A soft, dry sound. The Red Sea pulled back another inch as if offended. He pressed again. Not harder. Truer. The splinter burned. Not a light show, just ash in water. The hum under the floor stopped like a bad machine finally giving up. He withdrew the seed. It collapsed on his palm into nothing because its job was done. He looked at the altar. The shrine remained bones, banners, eyes amused. You're still here, he told Sukuna. Obviously, Sukuna said, delighted by honesty. But I have lost my favorite anchor. You will be harder to spill. Boring. Good, Harry said. He stood, put his wrist on the dented table out of habit, and opened the door back to the bed. The world returned in pieces, smell of singed linen, cold from the hall. Voldemort's ritual circle sneering over the bed. Voldemort blinked, owlish, as if a thread he'd been pulling had suddenly turned into smoke in his hands. He felt it all at once, horror in the form of subtraction. The anchors in the boy were gone. The body still held a power he did not understand, his power, the old stolen piece, was not there. His face moved in a way that wasn't a smile or a frown because he had forgotten those shapes. "What have you done?" Harry's voice was hoarse but steady. "Fixed my house." Sukuna's markings lifted, tasted the air, found nothing to love, and thinned to a memory. From the courtyard came a shout. "Nay, Ginny." Neville's voice, not breaking, not grand. Running steps. Steel. Hermione didn't look. She trusted. She moved. "Go," she told Ron, and he went. Neville met the snake at the base of the stairs, both hands on the sword, arms set like a farmer driving a post into hard soil. He didn't try for flourish. He cut true. Nagini's head hit the stone and slid. The body wrote 3 lines on the floor and stopped. Ron reached the door to the ward as Voldemort staggered, actually staggered, like gravity had found him after a long absence. The ritual collapsed into threads and fell like ash. Harry stood, swayed, steadied. Voldemort hissed and flung a curse that felt tired. Harry didn't bother to split it. He stepped sideways and let it miss. "Don't," Hermione said to Ron, because she saw the next thought in his eyes. "Keep hitting. We're done after one." Ron nodded, jaw tight. He walked in, not dramatic, and put his right hand on the old man's chest. CE gathered just enough to make the punch honest, not cruel. He swung once. The sound was small, flesh on bone. Voldemort went down without art. No wand crack, no thunder. Human. Final. Ron lifted his fist again on reflex. Hermione's hand closed on his wrist. "We're done," she said soft. He let the arm fall. Silence moved in. Catastrophic hush. The kind that means the loud thing will not start again. Harry's knees buckled. Hermione caught his shoulder and guided him to the bed. He didn't pass out. He chose to lie down. Sukuna, unmoored, looked around with interest and disdain. No fingers to return to. No anchor. He smiled once at the idea of absence and dissipated like a thought someone decides not to think. The ministry arrived in a swarm of parchment and shame. Kingsley did the talking because he had a badge and, more importantly, a tone people trusted when their first instinct was to lie to themselves. Croker came with a face like a ledger. He looked at Harry, at the fine scar pale as a pencil line, at the calm in the boy's chest where a humming had lived, and said, "We were wrong." "No," Hermione said, tired but sharp. "You were early and afraid. We'll write a policy for late and brave," he said. "Not contrition, an adjustment. It would do." Unspeakable doctrine changed in a week. Containment before rupture became a phrase on paper and in rooms where no one clapped. There were clauses about witnesses and lines and the difference between slips and surrender. Hermione wrote half of them. Gojo struck out the adjectives that wanted to be dramatic and left the verbs that would save lives. They held 3 funerals, not students. A groundskeeper who'd stood too long in the cold and never said when his chest hurt. A Hogsmeade shopkeeper no one had known was brave. A giant who died on Hogwarts soil because someone had taught him to be a weapon and no one had ever taught him to be anything else. Names spoken aloud. Stones warm under hands. No speeches longer than truth. Molly hugged Harry hard enough to make his ribs reconsider their job. "You come to dinner," she said through tears she refused to be embarrassed by. "Not as a hero, as a boy who needs to eat." "I will," he said, and meant I want to be that. Snape stood at the back of the ward and nodded once to no one when he saw that the shrine's grime was gone from Harry's eyes. He didn't apologize. He did remove the worst sentence from an old essay of his own and write a better one on the board the next morning for children who would now live long enough to be bored. Fudge fell. That part was loud and boring. Kingsley stood. That part was quiet and clean. Ginny forgave Harry for scaring her only after making him carry 3 buckets of water up 2 flights of stairs. "So you remember work," she said. He did. Bellatrix did not come to any of the funerals. She left a note instead. Susan found it wedged under a book on Harry's bedside table, a thin slip of parchment that smelled faintly of smoke and rain. "He is gone. You are not. I will find what is left and set it alight. Pray that I pray for you first." It read like a prayer and a threat. Hermione filed it under later. Harry filed it under Watch the Shadows on Tuesdays. In the great hall, Gojo leaned against the end of the staff table, blindfold hanging loose at his neck. Hair a ruin he no longer pretended to fix. 3 warnings, he told Harry, holding up a finger for each. 1, negative energy never goes to 0. Under grief, you'll leak. Keep the stove hum. Don't chase quiet. Make it by hand. "Got it," Harry said. "Tau reverse curse technique is a cost." Gojo went on. "It will lie and tell you it's free if you chain it to love. Don't let it. Save the big fixes for when bones are at stake, not pride." Harry nodded. 3 doors, Gojo said. "We opened one between worlds. Others heard. Some will knock. Some won't. Don't be polite if the knock is wrong." "Copy," Harry said, and the fond line. Gojo smiled, small. "Stay interesting," he said, and tied the blindfold back on. But not too interesting. He left a stack of notes Hermione would devour, diagrams without adjectives, technique without swagger. He left one book at Harry's bedside, Counting Without Magic, with a page dog-eared and a sarcastic, "Do your homework." He stepped through the wards the way he'd arrived, like fog deciding to be nothing. The library at 6 looked exactly like it should. Sun angled in a rectangle on the table. Dust hung in a lazy column and did not try to mean anything. Harry sat with a book open and Susan's fingers twined with his across the page. Not an announcement. Not a secret. A practiced habit. "You're chewing the inside of your cheek," she observed, amused. "I'm reading," he said. "You chew when you think about doing more than you have to," she said, and squeezed his hand once. "We aren't doing more right now. We're doing exactly enough." He let the line loosen in his jaw. "Exactly enough," he said, trying the words on. They fit. Hermione walked past and smacked a new policy draft on the table for him to sign as witness. 2 clauses on slip vs surrender added, she said. "Ha, look at us." Boring and precise. "Your favorite adjectives," Ron said, dropping into a chair with a grin and a sandwich. "Kingsley says if we keep writing memos like this, no one will have time to start a war." "Good," Hermione said. "Paper is heavy. Let it hold something for once." McGonagall passed behind them and pretended not to listen with a face that meant, "I am deeply listening." She had the look of a woman who slept and woke and believed it would happen again tomorrow. It suited her. Harry's scar was a pale line. It itched on rainy days. He scratched it without fear. Sometimes, at night, he walked the room he had built inside his head. The fire never misbehaved. The shelf held the ink blot. The table had a dent. The door stayed shut unless he opened it. A thin envelope arrived with the evening post, paper foreign, stamp unfamiliar. 3 words in a smooth hand: "Doors stay open." No signature. None needed. Harry tucked it inside his book like a bookmark you don't want to lose, but can't use every day. On Tuesdays, he checked the shadows anyway. Bellatrix's note lived under a paperweight on his desk at home. Sometimes he read it and felt nothing. Sometimes he read it and felt the pull and put his palm on the table until it passed. At dinner with the Weasleys, Molly pressed a second helping into his hands until no was the right boundary and not an affront. Arthur asked about plugs. George named a new toffee something wildly inappropriate, and then changed it when Hermione raised an eyebrow so fine it could cut fruit. They did one funeral a month later, private, quiet, for the giant buried under the orchard. Neville spoke 6 words and put his hand on the earth. That was enough. On a warm evening in June, Hogwarts' west buttress finally got its last line of repair. Harry ran his fingers along the new seam. The stone hummed back held. "Good wall," he said. "Good floor," Hermione said beside him and nudged his shoe with hers. "Tea." "Tea," he agreed. They walked in while the sky went the color of old tin again, and nothing bad happened because the world had decided to be ordinary for an evening. Harry sat in the library at 6 with Susan again and watched light inch across the table. He breathed on the count out of habit and found he liked the way it made thinking easy. He squeezed her fingers. She squeezed back. "Exactly enough," she said. "Exactly enough," he echoed. He did not look for banners or altars or C's. He knew where they were. He knew how to make rooms. He knew how to say no to the voice that offered silence and called it kindness. He turned the page. The ink blot on 92 waited for him like a familiar mistake. He smiled, small and earned. Then he read,